Chapter 361, Mathematics Does Not Lie. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze sharp. Dr. Kinos, you're still thinking too narrowly. Yes, controlling variables is essential, but it doesn't change how you apply genetic technology to your clones. Think of it simply as designing your own personal bodyguard. Dr. Kinos hesitated, brow furrowing in sudden realization. Of course, why hadn't he seen it before? Tweaking experimental groups or adding more controls wouldn't interfere with his security precautions. He could create 2 rhinoceros beetle clones, observe how one evolved under stress, maybe even press on its head to test its limits, and learn exactly when and how it might lose control. The weaker specimen would become irrelevant the moment the stronger one proved its worth. Kinos' eyes lit up. He turned to the clone standing nearest him. 0. No, 0. He said with conviction, we don't want to become monsters. We're aiming for perfect evolution. 0 inclined his head thoughtfully. Exactly. Our intellect matches yours, Doctor. Shouldn't such a brilliant mind inhabit a perfect body? The other clones nodded, voices low but firm. Yes, they agreed in unison. To let ourselves become monsters would be an insult to your genius. A hush fell over the laboratory. In that stillness, Ethan's words resonated. Mathematics does not lie. And neither did their ambition for true, unblemished evolution. Ethan and Dr. Kinos faced one another in the silent hum of the laboratory. Pale light from the overhead panels glinted off the polished floor. Ethan's voice was even, confident. I share your memories, Dr. Kinos. Our goals are one and the same. Kinos' eyes narrowed. Don't flatter yourself. You only possess fragments of my knowledge and insight. Ethan inclined his head, unruffled. Then tell me, what do you think of my initial proposal? He regarded Kinos steadily. To him, persuasion was an art, brute force for those deaf to reason, telepathy for the obstinate, scholarly debate for the curious. He took pleasure in matching method to mind. Kinos said nothing, as though he already knew where Ethan was headed. From the way Ethan carried himself, Kinos suspected the man had already achieved the evolutionary breakthrough he once pursued alone. At last, Kinos spoke, his voice low and sharp. Prove to me that your cautious approach is justified. Without a word, Ethan shifted his weight and his feet slid an inch off the ground. In a casual fluid motion, he rose until he hovered several feet above the floor, as if defying gravity were as natural to him as breathing. The display was neither violent nor showy, but elegant and precise. Kinos' mouth fell open. How are you doing that? Are you an Esper? He shook his head in wonder. No, Espers depend entirely on their gifts. They don't possess this level of insight or control. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. Raw power means nothing without understanding. Kinos recovered his composure, though surprise still flickered in his eyes. And what about my question? How far will you go to bring this plan to life? Ethan's gaze sharpened. As far as it takes. In that moment, Kinos realized he was no longer confronting a mere student or experiment. He was facing an equal. An unsettling realization, but one he could not ignore. Did you grow some special organ inside you that synthesizes energy? Kinos demanded, eyes blazing as he stared at Ethan. Ethan shook his head, his tone cool. No secret organ, no hidden battery pack, just gravity manipulation. Understanding dawned on Kinos, and he leaned forward. Then there's only one conclusion. You work for me, and only you may touch my experiments, no one else. Ethan met his gaze unflinchingly. I'll help, but on my terms. Kinos' stubborn expression softened just a fraction. All right, if you can defeat him, I'll assign one of my associates to assist you. With a quiet hum, Ethan activated his device. In an instant, Kinos and the entire Evolution Institute vanished from their underground base and reappeared in the heart of the Marvey, L universe. Kinos spun around, convinced Ethan had whisked them across dimensions to a hidden stronghold. He vowed to stay sealed off from the outside world. Whenever he needed intelligence, he'd dispatch his own operatives. Confident behind Galvatron's watchful surveillance and that impenetrable information cocoon, Ethan knew Kinos would never discover his true location. Ethan stepped into the bright conference room alongside Dr. Nakamura, the brilliant scientist who had pioneered Hydra's rejuvenation, cloning, and gene transplantation breakthroughs. Before Ethan could introduce his guest, Lord Black Caesar looked up from the head of the long table and smiled. Welcome back, Ethan, Caesar drawled. I hear you've brought us quite the genius, one who cracked the secrets of youth, perfected cloning, and even spliced in new genes. Impressive, but forgive me if I handle Hydra's science solo from now on. He waved a hand at Kinos, who was already bristling. And you must be our esteemed chief scientific officer? Caesar added, raising an eyebrow. Kinos pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. He hated being dismissed in his own field, and even worse, by someone whose only real job was signing checks. To date, Caesar had been caught misallocating research funds a staggering 112 times. Ethan had dealt with each infraction by simply cutting off his budget until he learned his lesson. Yet Caesar's smirk suggested he saw this as a challenge, as though he were testing how far he could push Ethan, and, by extension, Kinos. The sight of Caesar's enormous green-tinted head made Kinos' lip curl in contempt. Let the boss try to outsmart them. Kinos and Ethan had far bigger breakthroughs in the pipeline, and they weren't about to let a self-important administrator stand in their way. Ethan had long ago considered what it would take for humanity to undergo a true cognitive transformation, but Kinos dismissed the idea as unnecessary. True evolution, he insisted, would never rely on crude brain augmentation shortcuts. So when the rival researcher unveiled his crude modification technology, Kinos scorned it outright. Supposedly, it would expand neural capacity, but the result was nothing more than grotesque deformities and unwarranted arrogance. Frankly, if this was the best Hydra's chief science officer could produce, Kinos figured he could take that position himself in a matter of minutes. Ethan watched the two men size each other up, eager to see whose theories would hold. Before long, the Hydra chief researcher grew impatient. Your fundamentals are weak. He snapped at Kinos. I won't waste my time with someone whose training comes from wherever you came from. With a sniff of disgust, the chief turned on his heel and stalked away. Kinos watched him go, brows knitted in thought. Ethan leaned forward. What did he mean by that? Kinos shook his head. His foundations are all wrong, full of paradoxes, missing data, outright errors, and yet somehow parts of his argument held together. It's driving me crazy. He folded his arms. It seems the man's knowledge is as unstable as his techniques. Ethan paced in the brightly lit laboratory, his brow furrowed as he studied the scrolling equations on the holo display. If these formulas aren't just someone else's data regurgitated, he muttered, then there must be a mismatch between the calibration here and back home. Mathematics doesn't lie. Kinos, seated at the adjacent console, perked up. Looks like you found it, he said with genuine excitement. Ethan nodded, surprise flickering across his face. He had suspected something was off, but hearing it confirmed so matter-of-factly unsettled him. So, we're not just on another planet? This is another universe entirely? The physical constants and the math that describes them aren't the same as in my world? Exactly, Kinos replied, grinning. You've unearthed a discovery even our boss overlooked. A flush of pride warmed Ethan's cheeks. Then I'll need to relearn the fundamentals from scratch, adjust every theorem and equation to the new parameters. Don't worry, Kinos said, waving a hand dismissively. Your technology, any device you brought with you, will still work here. The formulas might be off on paper, but the hardware runs just fine. Ethan raised an eyebrow. How is that even possible? A universe with different physics, different math, yet my gadgets still function? It's absurd. For the first time, Kinos looked genuinely taken aback. He had been supremely confident in his own ability to master a world's worth of knowledge on his own terms. But he hadn't expected Ethan to question the very fabric of this place. Kinos opened his mouth to answer, the glow of the laboratory lights catching in his eyes as he searched for an explanation. Chapter 362, Conflict Between the Two Factions. That's the wonder of this world, Ethan said with a self-assured smile. If you truly believe you can pull something off, then even if it sounds absurd, you will. Kinos watched him, reminded of Tony Stark's cave-born triumph, when Stark reconstructed the arc reactor in that desolate cavern, forged his first Iron Man suit from scrap steel, and even managed to synthesize a brand new element under the most unforgiving conditions. In our world, of course, smashing together raw materials with nothing more than jury-rigged instruments would have shattered every component, and the high-energy particles released would have torn the whole place apart. Stark never donned protective gear, Yet not only did he produce a glowing new element brighter than any daylight bulb, he did it without even worrying about lethal radiation levels. In the Marvel Universe, logical consistency, so long as your setup holds together, makes the impossible feel entirely plausible. Genos shook his head in silent awe. In a world like this, nothing seemed truly impossible, yet he couldn't quite grasp why. He wasn't about to replicate Stark's feat anytime soon. For now, his priority was to understand the underlying science of this realm. Only then might he bridge the gap between mere belief and real power. Ethan surveyed the cavernous control chamber, its walls bristling with biomechanical conduits and shimmering metal plating. "Let me be clear," he said, voice echoing. "I've relocated the entire Evolution House here and converted it into a Hydra outpost." Galvatron stood beside him, arms folded. "The base is entirely underground," he confirmed. "I constructed it using thundersteel from the Dragon Ball dimension, transmuted by your transformation magic. Even a magnitude 10 earthquake wouldn't shift a beam, let alone to form a wall." Ethan nodded. "And with the addition of vibranium, dark silver, and my own alloy, Krypton gold, it's utterly impregnable." He gestured at the honeycomb pattern carved into the rock. "This hive design isn't just aesthetic. I had you deploy nanobots to tunnel this complex into the adjacent cavern and link it directly to the Evolution House." "Your recruits from the old facility?" Galvatron raised an eyebrow. "All of them have been indoctrinated," Ethan replied. "They're now loyal Hydra operatives. Even the oddballs who once prowled Genos' labs have fallen in line, including Mosquito Girl." At Ethan's command, a transparent cylinder hissed open. Inside floated a slender figure, wings folded delicately at her back. Her skin glowed pale under the nutrient solution. Galvatron studied her curiously. "She was still in the culture tank when you had me reroute the nanites?" "That's right," Ethan said with a self-satisfied grin. "Genos completed her, removing parasites, perfecting her two-dimensional features, refining her vocal cords for dubbing. No mites, no flaws. She may feel disoriented now, like a newborn, but once she adapts, she'll be unstoppable." Mosquito Girl's luminescent eyes fluttered open. She flexed her fingers experimentally, testing her strengths and limitations. Though tentative at first, the look in her eyes was unmistakable. Bound now by loyalty, she belonged to Ethan's new order. Chapter 1. The Swarm Above Evolution House. I'm Ethan, an apprentice hero assigned to monitor experimental threats at Evolution House. That morning, I climbed to the rooftop observation deck, just in time to see the sky darken with a writhing swarm of mosquitoes. They weren't ordinary insects. They were bioweapons, genetically engineered to siphon the life force of any creature they encountered and channel it back into their own strength. At the center of the cloud hovered the Mosquito Girl. Even unfinished, she was unsettlingly beautiful, a slender woman with translucent, wing-like membranes and eyes that glinted red in the sunlight. With a graceful flick of her wrist, she commanded thousands of mosquitoes to break off and attack the city below. I watched in horror as the swarm descended on Unsu, specting civilians, piercing their skin and draining their blood. Each drop of life they stole only fueled the Mosquito Girl's power. Down below, Dr. Genos, another of Evolution Hawes's creations, faced her in battle. Despite his blazing firepower and cybernetic reinforcements, he struggled to get close. Every time he landed a hit, the Mosquito Girl absorbed his energy through the spores and shifted, growing faster and stronger. Genos fell back, battered and nearly broken. I radioed for backup, but it felt like the very air was against us. Then, without warning, Saitama casually strolled onto the scene. He glanced at the Mosquito Girl as if she were an annoying fly on his sleeve. With a single, effortless slap, he sent her sprawling into the air, mosquitoes and all. The entire swarm dissipated in a gust of wind, leaving the rooftop strewn with crushed insects. Genos, half stunned, could only stare. Afterward, the atmosphere changed entirely. Evolution House hosted a small celebration. Dr. Kenos and the armored gorilla set up a takoyaki stand in the courtyard, and even the Mosquito Girl, now depowered and reformed, helped serve. She wore a simple yukata that, ironically, drew even more attention than her villainous costume. Customers lined up, not just for the hot, savory balls of octopus, but for the chance to meet the notorious Mosquito Girl face to face. She laughed as she flipped each takoyaki with a practiced hand, trading witty banter with the gorilla and Dr. Kenosi. Watching them, I realized that in this world of bizarre experiments and unstoppable threats, sometimes the most terrifying creations could become just another part of the community, selling street food with a smile. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning of my apprenticeship at Evolution Haas. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a wry smile playing on his lips as he read the verses one of his admirers had penned for Mosquito Girl. In swirling black mists, dragons coil, typhoon winds encircle onyx eyes. The enchanting Mosquito Girl lingers, her alabaster limbs bound in jade ribbons, muscles and bones stretched into 4 segments, each 2 meters long. Dark filigrees coil around her narrow waist and swell beneath pert breasts. Her ethereal face tilts up, cherry lips parting to bare, slender fangs. From the tip of her segmented tail drips scarlet blood. Her voice, a delicate whisper, resonates as she hangs inverted. So wet, so wondrously wet. Ethan set the poem aside. Compared to Crossbow S, Mosquito Girl was undeniably more beautiful, and a pleasing subordinate was always a plus. He only frowned at the memory of her post-feed deformity. Perhaps he should ask Genos to develop a treatment for the discoloration and swelling she suffered after sucking blood. Mosquito Girl, he called. At his summons, she drifted forward on slender joints, eyes gleaming. Once a routine white-collar worker, she'd been snatched by Genos and remade into this mesmerizing creature. Now she hovered before her boss, every curve and pattern on her body on full display, hoping to earn his approval. After Mosquito Girl came to her senses deep inside the dragon's lair, an even more nightmarish place than even Kino's evolutionary chamber, she knew exactly what to do. Cling to the one person who could protect her. Who else had defenses as impenetrable as Ethan's? So she practically threw herself at him. Wanda watched, her gratitude curdling into irritation. Ethan, better known by his code name, Black Caesar, had just rescued her and her brother Pietro, and she was sincerely thankful. She'd always admired his steely composure, and had even pushed herself to show off her powers in hopes of earning a sliver of his approval. But this, Mosquito Girl draped over him in nothing more than skimpy black and white strips, was too much. Wanda couldn't read Ethan's emotions, but she knew one thing. If he didn't want Mosquito Girl here, she wouldn't have stayed. His silent acceptance stung more than any glare. "Boss, would you like some tea?" Mosquito Girl cooed, setting a steaming cup in front of him. Ethan accepted it with a single nod, lifting the porcelain to his lips without missing a beat. Mosquito Girl beamed, certain she'd secured her place by his side. Down the hallway, a heated argument erupted in bright, flamboyant tones. The Unicorn Fairy and Bronski's crew were at it again, trading insults like dueling swords. But that was just their style. Reckless words hurled with reckless abandon, the only language they truly understood. Ethan's mandibles clicked as he strode into the Hydra Operations Center, his gleaming chitin armor flexing beneath the harsh lights. "What's with the looks?" he taunted, puffing out his powerful forelegs. "Never seen muscles like mine?" Despite being Lord Black Caesar's loyal lieutenant, a distinction he never hesitated to broadcast, Ethan was determined to prove himself the strongest dog in Caesar's pack. His years in the army had taught him one thing: whoever packs the biggest punch calls the shots. And these new recruits wouldn't know discipline or respect until someone showed them. A sneering corporal who'd been sizing him up scoffed. "You think you're so tough? Let's see if you can back it up." Perfect. Ethan lowered his horned head and lunged forward, armor creaking with anticipation. "Fine by me. Prepare yourselves to witness the might of the Chimera Beast Emperor." When Caesar had first overseen Ethan's metamorphosis, the official designation was Chimera Hulk, but Ethan loathed that clumsy title. It sounded brutish and uninspired. So Black Caesar rechristened him the Chimera Beast Emperor, and from that day on, Ethan wore the name like a crown. Now, amidst the roar of surprised onlookers, he braced himself. This would be the lesson they'd never forget. In Hydra's ranks, true power wasn't granted. It was earned, one conclusive strike at a time. "Is that the so-called masterpiece of that big-headed fellow?" Kinos asked, brow arched in skepticism. Beside him, the big boss nodded once, as if sharing a secret. They had both come to witness the duel, eager for any advantage that might come from studying their rival's fighting style. Outwardly, the big boss wore a dismissive smirk, scanning the arena with bored eyes. Yet beneath that facade, he knew full well that Black Caesar never wasted his time on the worthless. If Caesar had handpicked this challenger, the man must be formidable. Chapter 363, Bronsky pulls ahead. Kinos watched in stunned silence as Bronsky's body began to shudder and expand. Within seconds, he'd ballooned into a towering giant, limbs thickening, muscles bulging. Kinos staggered back, eyes wide. How is this even possible? He'd seen Genos push human evolution before, but Genos' experiments had all ended in monstrous abominations, humans losing themselves to pure brute force. What Kinos was witnessing now went a step beyond. Bronsky had hit on a way to evolve his body into a colossal monster, then snap right back to human form at will. If anyone could decipher the mechanism behind that kind of power, they could revolutionize everything. The horned fairy, who had materialized at Kinos' side, stared up at Bronsky with equal amazement. "Incredible," he breathed. "If this works the way it looks, I can free my limbs completely. No more restraints." He flicked his horned helm in thought, then offered a grin. "But we shouldn't stay here. All this shape-shifting will tear up the ground." Bronsky shook his oversized head. "Not to worry. This entire operations area is reinforced with a layer of kryptonium and vibranium. Not even a charging red tank could crack it." Bronsky cast a casual glance at the horned fairy. "Is that right?" The fairy simply nodded, eyes still glued to the giant figure above them, as Bronsky's massive form rippled with power. "All right, let's get started." With a thunderous stamp, the rhinoceros beast surged forward. The reinforced laboratory Kinos had built to contain its strength rattled and began to crack under the sheer force. Its massive hoofs locked like anchors in the floor as it charged, and across the room, Blonsky braced himself, muscles coiling like a spring. In an instant, they collided, two living tanks slamming together with bone-shaking impact. Sparks flew from twisted metal and shattered concrete. Only a handful of the bravest onlookers stayed to witness the clash. The rest wisely fled the chamber. Blonsky's body was a grotesque marvel of bioengineering. His augmented physiology fused with the terminal virus that ran through his veins. He was a walking weapon, and no mere beast could hope to match him. The rhinoceros beast reared back and threw a savage punch at Blonsky's jaw. Blonsky absorbed it like steel. A jagged crack split the horned creature's facial carapace, even as its knuckles shattered into bone fragments against Blonsky's unyielding flesh. Before the beast could recover, Blonsky's fist rocketed forward in a second devastating blow. The blow sent the horned titan hurtling across the lab. The shockwave dashed Blonsky back several paces, but he landed on his feet, chest heaving with triumph. Amid the echoing wreckage, there was no doubt. Blonsky had utterly crushed the one-horned rhinoceros beast. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He'd poured years of work into the one-horned fairy, his own gene-engineered marvel, born from the original unicorn prototype that had exploded at its power limit. Every failed experiment, every spliced strand of controlled DNA had been in service of this moment, proving his creation unbeatable. And yet here he stood, watching someone else's beast outperform it. He shoved his glasses back up the bridge of his nose and locked eyes on the arena floor. "Unicorn Demon," he called, voice steady, "show them your true strength. Activate Asura mode." The one-horned fairy's single horn ignited with crimson energy. Steam hissed from its flaring nostrils as its entire form grew more muscular, more fearsome. Ethan felt his pulse quicken at the sight. This was the form he'd dreamed of. Across the ring, Bronsky's own creature prepared to meet it. The crowd fell silent, the tension so thick it rattled in their chests. Even the Beast King's legendary claw strikes, said to carve skyscrapers in two, had been brushed off with a casual flick. Yet the one-horned fairy hesitated now, as though sensing its equal. Bronsky's beast lunged first. Its punch cleaved the air, a gale-force blow meant to shatter bone. The one-horned fay braced, but the hit landed with nothing more than a hollow thunk against its armored hide. Bronsky grinned. "Nice try," he taunted, "but you'll need more than that to hurt me." No scratch marred his flesh. The one-horned fairy reared back, eyes aflame with rage. A bestial roar rolled out of its chest. "Impossible! I am invincible!" It charged again, horn lowered, fist coiled like a wrecking ball. The wind screamed around its blow, and then, impossibly, Bronsky caught it. With one hand he wrapped around the creature's iron-hard wrist, gripping as though it were nothing more than a twig. The arena gasped. The one-horned fairy thrashed, but Bronski's grin only widened. He hefted the creature's arm, testing its strength. "Heh," he said, voice low enough for Ethan alone to hear. "I've already calculated every ounce of your power." Silence fell. Ethan's heart pounded. For the first time, he wondered if his masterpiece, and his reputation, might not be as invincible as he once believed. Ethan tightened his grip around the creature's charging fist and held it fast. Before the horned warrior could even register surprise, Ethan drove his free arm into a devastating cannon punch to its armored chest. A thunderous shockwave detonated off the vibranium plating, rippling outward in a brief, invisible roar. The beast was flung backward into the fortress wall. Its armor cracked, but its vibranium shell held, absorbing the worst of the impact. Ethan advanced, brushing dust from his gloves. "Not bad," he said with a cocky grin. "But is that all you've got?" The one-horned combatant picked itself up slowly, offering him a mocking smile instead of a glare. Ethan's grin faded. "All right, let's turn it up." With a guttural snarl, the creature's body began to swell. Its purple-green armor plates shifted and clicked, muscles bulging until it towered over Ethan, twice its former size. "Behold, the Ashura-armored one-horned immortal," it bellowed, voice like grinding steel. Ethan stared up, heart pounding. "Going big, huh?" He raised his fist, then the giant clawed hand slammed into his ribs with bone-shattering force. He sailed backward through the air, every breath exploding in his lungs as he crashed against the distant wall. Ethan barely had time to register what was coming. The Ashura unicorn, now fully unleashed, moved with a speed and force that rivaled any dragon. From what he knew of the ghost-level king of beasts, who could slice through skyscrapers with nothing more than the air blade formed by its claws, dragon-tier threats were like living natural disasters, capable of leveling entire cities. The Asura unicorn was no different. If someone didn't stop it now, there would be nothing left but rubble. A single brutal blow sent Ethan crashing into a concrete wall. Pain exploded through his ribs as he slid down to the pavement. Gritting his teeth, he rolled away just in time to avoid the unicorn's reprisal, a punishing downward strike. Shaking off the impact, Ethan forced himself to his feet, adrenaline sharpening his focus. The unicorn didn't pause. Fists like hammers rained down on Ethan in a relentless hail. Each strike felt like it would crush bone on contact, but Ethan refused to fall. "Ha!" The beast roared, its voice echoing off the shattered buildings around them. "I'll keep pounding you until next week. Think you've got the stamina to last that long?" All the while, Ethan did something the Asura unicorn couldn't possibly predict. He began absorbing the kinetic energy behind every punch. With each crushing blow, the force that should have shattered his defenses instead fueled his resolve. And as the beast gored and ground against him, Ethan braced himself for the counterstrike that would turn the tide of this battle. Ethan's mutated gift let him absorb kinetic energy and grow stronger the harder he was hit, much like the Red Hulk's gamma-fueled power surge or the Green Hulk's rage-driven might. He wasn't as versatile as Emperor Shaw, who could siphon every form of energy, but when it came to pure impact, Ethan was unparalleled. Every punch, every kick merely fueled his strength. He endured hundreds of blows from the Asura rhinoceros beetle armor, and then with a single hurricane fist, he shattered the plated chest piece. The beetle staggered, eyes wide in disbelief, as crimson blood seeped through the crack. "Impossible," the armored warrior wheezed. "I should crush him." Beside the arena, Kinos' eyes flicked over his data display. He had crunched every stat on Ethan and predicted a swift victory for the Asura suit. Instead, his model lay in ruins, just like the beetle's armor. The Asura rhinoceros beetle collapsed, grievously wounded but alive. Ethan stepped forward, shoulders squared, scanning the remaining combatants. "Who's next?" he asked, voice steady and absolutely unafraid. Chapter 364, The Showdown Between Kinos and the Big Boss. Man stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding. "Purple-skinned brute, come here." Blonsky eyed him warily. He was intrigued by this mysterious adversary, but put off by his unshakable arrogance. Before Blonsky could size him up, Vaccine Man snorted and unleashed a glowing sphere of energy from his palm. Blonsky's eyes widened, then went dark. Boom! The blast detonated with the force of a hydrogen bomb, sending shockwaves rippling across the field. Legends said Vaccine Man's energy attacks had already razed entire cities. Now Blonsky felt just how terrifying they truly were. Vaccine Man wasn't finished. With a casual wave of his hand, 3 more crackling orbs materialized above his palm, each humming with lethal power, far deadlier than even the Wandering Emperor's mightiest blasts. He fired them in quick succession. Blonsky relied on his speed, twisting and weaving to avoid a direct hit. Still, the explosions erupted around him, and their shockwaves battered his body. He staggered, bruised and winded, but he refused to fall. As smoke drifted through the air, Blonsky glared at Vaccine Man. He'd weathered the onslaught, for now, and the real contest was just beginning. The vast chamber offered Blonsky no refuge. With each of Vaccine Man's charged orbs that detonated against the reinforced walls, the shockwave intensified inside the sealed space. The air itself seemed to liquefy under the pressure and heat. Even the vibranium plating, renowned for withstanding the strongest impacts, began to glow and warp, as if melting from the inside out. In that instant, it felt like a handful of hydrogen bombs had gone off in close quarters. No material, however legendary, could stay intact. Vaccine Man tossed a glance over his shoulder at Blonsky and allowed himself a faint, satisfied smirk. "Still think you can stand against me?" Blonsky's comrades, who only moments before had bristled with confidence, now stared in horror at Vaccine Man's display. Their minds raced back to tales of the ancient Saiyan invasion, when Captain Marvel and the Illuminati had barely held back an onslaught of planet-shattering power. The uncanny resemblance was impossible to ignore. The way Vaccine Man drew energy from the void, the raw devastation he wielded, he might as well have been a Saiyan warlord reborn. Cornered, Blonsky lowered his head in reluctant concession. His prized Chimera Beast Emperor, an amalgam creature of coarse hide and towering muscle, had demolished every opponent he'd faced. But against Vaccine Man's dimension-shredding force, it was nothing more than a battered pawn. With a curt nod, Blonsky admitted defeat. Ethan watched the scene unfold with steely composure. He knew Blonsky's Chimera Beast Emperor wasn't just a brute, it still harbored untapped potential. What made the difference wasn't muscle or bone, but one elusive fusion ingredient: strange cells. Those anomalous cells held the key to shattering biological limiters, transforming a powerhouse into an unstoppable juggernaut. If Blonsky had secured them, the battle might have ended differently. But for now, the chamber lay in ruins, battered by energies beyond comprehension. As smoke and sparks danced across the shattered vibranium, one truth stood clear to Ethan. Whatever chain of events had led them here was far from over, and somewhere in the wreckage, more secrets waited to be unearthed. Ethan weighed his options carefully. Ingesting those alien cells could instantly transform an ordinary person into a tiger-level monster. On paper, tiger levels weren't top tier, but they could flip tanks, shred entire platoons, and lay waste to anything in their path. There was no way he'd feed Blonsky the raw cells. Blonsky's body was already a battlefield of uncontrolled mutations, held together only by a volatile balance that even the terminal virus might be unable to contain. Instead, Ethan intended to have Genos and Big Boss analyze the alien cells in the lab, isolate their active compounds, and engineer a harmless analog. Only once they'd eliminated the side effects would he consider giving it to Blonsky. Stability had to come first. And the alien cells weren't the only game-changer in this dimension. There was also Biceps King, the so-called ultimate steroid developed by Fu Kegao, the younger brother of the legendary giant. A single dose could elevate a normal human to dragon-level strength. After all, in the original timeline, the giant was officially ranked only as ghost level, yet he had obliterated a city with a slap and reduced another to rubble with a single kick. Hardly feats befitting a mere mid-tier threat. Ethan himself had little personal use for these miraculous enhancements, but for his operatives, and for Earth's defense, they were worth every risk. If the people of Earth aren't tempered by hardship, how will they ever hope to drive Thanos to his knees? Though Vaccine Man had decisively beaten Blonsky in their last engagement, he wasn't promoted to head of the operations department. He simply didn't possess, nor desired, the strategic aptitude required for command. Blonsky himself was equally unconcerned. A consummate field operative, he knew only how to follow orders and had no wish to lead others. Before long, Ethan, the organization's supreme commander, and Genos, the cyborg prodigy, squared off in a different kind of battle. Genos had already gathered every scrap of biometric data and mission debrief from Galvatron's action unit, and now he applied his analytical mind to Ethan's profile. No one was exempt. In the makeshift laboratory that now served as headquarters, Genos methodically tested each operative. He ran blood scans on Vaccine Man to study his accelerated healing factors, isolated Unicorn Fairy's luminescent pheromones for molecular analysis, and extracted muscle tissue samples from Iron Gorilla. Only Mosquito Girl managed to slip away. She'd trailed Black Caesar into the corridors and evaded Genos' screening. Unicorn Fairy didn't protest. He'd seen Blonsky's combat prowess firsthand and knew Vaccine Man alone could overwhelm their entire squad. In the end, resistance was futile. He bowed to the inevitable and submitted to Genos' examinations, hoping that whatever they learned would one day help humanity stand strong against foes far greater than themselves. At the same time, Genos received Ethan's first assignment: fix the flaw that caused the mosquito women to warp into grotesque forms after feeding. Though he could have undone it with a snap of his fingers, Ethan insisted on bringing the rest of the team into the project. After all, what's the point of having support staff if he did everything himself? Genos shrugged off any hesitation and agreed immediately. With dozens of clones at his disposal, a little extra work was no burden. Since that conversation, Genos had been turning the problem over in his head, and he'd come up with the perfect solution. Several of his clones volunteered to undergo his human body modification protocol. As a result, in addition to his signature one-horned fairy construct, Genos would now be flanked at all times by a newly upgraded long-horned worm. Engineered on the same biotechnical principles, the worm boasted even greater strength and stability thanks to Genos' refinements. When word reached him that a magical virus, comparable to the Extremis strain, was also in play, Genos grew even more excited. Without missing a beat, he designed and brought online a massive halberd bug, its chassis hardened against viral corruption. But beyond that, he resolved to hold off on any further creations until the mosquito women's human form could be perfected. Only once their living disguises were secure would Genos unleash any more of his uncanny inventions. Ethan stood his ground, unshaken, as the Unicorn Fairy hovered by his side, and the giant beetle loomed protectively behind him. Their very presence was enough to keep any threat at bay. Yet in the heart of the facility, the director was grappling with a far more puzzling discovery. Several of the House of Evolution's arid creatures, most notably the rhinoceros beetles, should have succumbed to the genetic stresses built into their design. Instead, they'd not only survived but thrived, displaying uncanny resilience that no one could explain. As if that weren't enough, another project had taken a darker turn. The so-called vaccine people were organisms derived from viruses engineered to serve as inoculations. On paper, they were humanity's salvation. In practice, they were lethal. These beings were programmed to attack human hosts like any deadly pathogen. The only saving grace was their fatal flaw: they could not tolerate oxygen. Exposed to air, they perished in seconds. How, given that real viruses need anaerobic environments to survive, had anyone created a strain that both thrived inside a living body and died the instant it met the atmosphere? Desperate for answers, the director pored over the genetic data, the environmental controls, even the lab's geographical coordinates. The patterns he uncovered were impossible under Earth's known laws of biology. Then the chilling truth emerged. Dr. Kenos's revolutionary theories hadn't failed. They'd been formulated on an entirely different world. In other words, these beings weren't Earthborn at all, but alien in origin. The subtle influence of their homeworld's unique environment had warped every data point, producing organisms that defied terrestrial science. Now, fully aware of the broader stakes, the director knew they were dealing not just with runaway experiments, but with the biology of another planet. For instance, if you lived on a planet circling a massive gravitational body, your observations would be radically different from those on Earth, and the technologies you developed would follow entirely new paths. Chapter 365, The Bald Devil. The command center hummed with activity as Genos and the director leaned over a sprawling digital map, tracing the threads of a brewing conspiracy. Screens around them flickered with data feeds, surveillance footage, and classified dossiers, yet neither of them noticed Ethan slip quietly away. Moments later, Ethan sat alone before a holoscreen calibrated to the world of One Punch Man. His fingers danced over the controls as he accessed the Hero Association's latest files. A name in bold letters caught his eye: Zombie Man. Truly remarkable, Ethan murmured. He survived a week of torture at the hands of the Monster Association's King of the Unicorn, yet never died. His regenerative capabilities are on an entirely different level from Wolverine's. Logan needed adamantium to keep his bones intact. This guy literally reassembles from dust. He pulled up the gruesome footage, limbs torn apart, skin melted away. Yet within seconds, Zombie Man's body knitted itself back together as though he were nothing more than a torn page in a book. Ethan frowned. They say his energy conservation mechanisms broke down after the Wandering Emperor blew him to pieces. Now he somehow absorbs raw energy to fuel his regeneration. Where does that power come from? Genos should still have all the technical specs buried somewhere in his databanks. If I can capture him alive, his cells could revolutionize regenerative medicine. Ethan paused the tape and switched databases. Next on his list was the only pure-blood vampire in this universe. 3 generations of unbroken lineage, officially certified by the Monster Research Institute. This vampire had eluded every scientific effort to crack his bloodline. Compared to Zombie Man's brute strength and rapid healing, the vampire's abilities seemed modest, but pure vampire genetics could hold secrets Marvel's scholars have only dreamed of. He leaned back and allowed himself a rare, small smile. Combine zombie cell regeneration with vampire vitality. No wonder the director wants both specimens, and with Saitama in the vicinity, there's an opportunity I can't ignore. With finality, Ethan sealed the files and rose from his seat. Outside the simulation room, the corridors of the covert facility lay silent. Within minutes, he would step into the portal and materialize in City Z. There, among caped heroes and monstrous villains, he would hunt down the 2 phenomena that could reshape the future of biological warfare. And if fortune favored him, he might even meet the bald hero whispered about in every corner of the Hero Association. Saitama, the man who ended any fight with a single punch. As the machines powered up behind him, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. Zombie Man, the pure-blood vampire, and Saitama. If he succeeded, the secrets he brought back would make him unstoppable. If he failed, well, failure simply wasn't an option. With that thought burning in his chest, Ethan stepped into the light and vanished. Ethan's heart pounded as he stared up at the colossal figure looming before him. He couldn't tell if this was the sleek, sculpted Saitama drawn by Murata or the rougher, off-model version from one's webcomic, but it didn't matter. He was back in the world of One Punch Man, and things were already going sideways. A vast, inky shadow blotted out the sun. Hundreds of meters tall, the giant towered above the city, so enormous that even the cloud line only reached his waist. Seeing it in person, Ethan realized just how terrifying its power could be. In the blink of an eye, the giant's nerve reflexes snapped into motion, and its fist ripped through buildings as if they were paper, leaving a yawning crater in its wake. Ethan leapt without hesitation, landing squarely on the giant's massive shoulder blade. Yelling to be heard over the rumble of destruction, he raised his arms triumphantly. "That's it, big guy. Show them what we're made of. Tear this city apart. This world belongs to us." From below, a man in a white lab coat rushed forward, eyes wide with shock. Sudden appearance had drawn his attention. Fokker, the brilliant scientist known for studying these colossal threats. "Hey, what are you doing up there? Who are you and how did you get here?" Fokker called, voice trembling between curiosity and fear. Ethan turned, a cruel grin splitting his face. With a single, practiced shove, he sent the stunned scientist sprawling backward. As Fokker hit the pavement, Ethan laughed, a cold, triumphant sound that echoed through the ruins of the city. Around them, the world was crumbling, and Ethan knew he had all the power he needed to help his new ally lay waste to everything in their path. "Help me, brother, quick!" Fokker's terrified shout rang out as he hurtled from an impossible height. He knew that if he struck the ground, he would be nothing but splinters. Desperate, he reached out, calling, "Nissan!" Below him, his colossal sibling lunged forward, arm outstretched. But Fokker's falling speed had reached its limit, and Nissan's muscles were harder than bedrock. A sickening crack rang through the air as Fokker smashed into Nissan's upraised hand. In an instant, he disintegrated. Even Nissan, unprepared for such force from above, recoiled as if he'd slammed into a speeding boulder. Ethan, watching from a short distance, simply shook his head. To him, both brothers had met the same fate, crushed under overwhelming power. At that moment, a gleaming bald dome drifted into Ethan's peripheral vision. So polished it might serve as a mirror, the head belonged to someone known for that signature look, an oversized light bulb-shaped skull paired with perpetually drooping eyelids. Aside from those two features, he appeared utterly unremarkable. He lacked the grand bearing you'd expect in a warrior. Ethan suspected his emotions had long since grown numb. He wore a threadbare yellow bodysuit beneath a worn white cape, resembling a homemade version of some plastered-together superhero costume. And yet, despite his ordinary demeanor, a strange, quiet authority clung to him, as if he were waiting for the right moment to move. According to the OVA's records, Saitama's iconic suit was custom-made by a devoted tailor who admired his lofty ideals, so it carries a special, commemorative value. And now at last, I stand face to face with you, the bald-caped man, the bald devil himself. Who are you? Saitama asked Ethan, tilting his head in genuine curiosity. Before he could even finish the question, Ethan's fist shot forward and connected cleanly with Saitama's jaw. By birth, Saitama was just an ordinary guy, but 3 years of relentless self-imposed training shattered every limit he once knew. His strength skyrocketed, making quick work of one bizarre threat after another. Exactly how powerful Teacher Saitama really is remains the series' greatest mystery, fuel for countless fan debates and daydreams. The original creator, One, famously declared that no adversary would ever force Saitama to truly struggle. Yet this remake changes everything. In its darkest corners of the cosmos, Saitama now faces the ravenous entity known only as the Hungry Wolf. Because he's never before met an enemy who can match him blow for blow, Saitama's power growth, so subtle it's almost undetectable, has been driven to explode by emotions he's never felt before. Hungry Wolf had transcended his old limits, mastering the uncanny ability to replicate and amplify each of his own techniques so that every strike grew more devastating than the last. At this rate, he'd even eclipse the Saitama of old, an unthinkable heresy to purists who cling to the original One Punch Man mythos. But Ethan, the young fighter concealed beneath the Hungry Wolf mantle, cared nothing for fan service or sacred canon. He played by his own rules. In the span of a heartbeat, a femtosecond, a plank time, he shattered Saitama's legendary invulnerability. "Let's go," Ethan roared, launching his fiercest punch. The blow landed cleanly. Saitama rocketed backward, carving a blazing trail through the sky. The resulting sonic boom and shockwave toppled skyscrapers like matchsticks. When the caped Baldy finally crashed to Earth, half the city lay in ruin. Ethan touched down amid the smoking debris, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The rubble settled, and a groan cut through the silence. Saitama's head lolled to one side. He blinked up at the destruction, his own voice strangled. A familiar voice calling my name? Why does everything hurt? He pressed a hand to his temples, confusion and pain warring on his face. Who hit me? Since when can I feel pain? That should have been impossible. Saitama had always been impervious, yet memories flooded him. The time Bang's strike left his skull throbbing, and the day the mysterious cat god raked his flesh with claws sharp as razors. In that moment, Saitama realized it wasn't his invincibility that had failed. This new rival had rewritten the rules of the fight, and for the first time, the hero who ends battles in one punch was staring down an enemy who might just end him. Ethan's audacity was astounding. He'd pulled off something even Boros couldn't. Every blow he'd landed on Saitama up to now had felt like he was merely scratching the hero's surface. Clearly, this cat was in a different league altogether, something beyond even the gods. Saitama hit the ground hard, knees buckling, but he forced himself upright. Before he could fully recover, Ethan was already in front of him, his fist rocketing toward Saitama's skull. Instinctively, Saitama flailed out an arm to block, but it was too late. Boom! A shockwave rippled through the air, held in check only by Ethan's bioforce field. The surrounding cityscape trembled, but didn't collapse. Saitama staggered back again, finally blinking in surprised recognition. That guy, he's actually strong? Saitama paused, his usual nonchalance gone, replaced by a flicker of concern. Then, almost grudgingly, his eyes brightened. So now you notice? Before Saitama could react further, Ethan reappeared inches from his face. With a single thought, the younger man had ramped his striking power to the equivalent of 100 million tons. But for the first time ever, that was no match for Saitama's invulnerability. Not a hair moved on the bald hero's head. Damn it, Saitama growled, rubbing his jaw. You've already clocked me 3 times in the face. Usually, punches to the face meant nothing to him. Literally no pain, no damage. But Ethan's blows had been different. They had left Saitama feeling something he hadn't in ages. Irritation. And that, above all else, was something worth exploring. Hit me in the face, just once, Saitama taunted. In the next instant, he thrust out his fist and landed a clean punch against Ethan's cheek. Chapter 366, Crushing. Ethan could hardly believe what just happened. He'd actually managed to land a punch on Saitama's face. He'd moved faster than the legendary bald cape, his fist striking with a dull, bone-jarring thud. Saitama staggered backward, pressing a hand to his cheek, his eyes wide with surprise. Wasting no time, Ethan pressed the attack. He unleashed a rapid succession of blows, each one driving Saitama farther back until the hero was hurled thousands of meters through the air. When Saitama finally smashed to the ground, cratering the earth beneath him, blood trickled from his mouth and stained the grass. You, how dare you hit me in the face? Saitama growled, pushing himself upright. He rubbed his cheek, glaring at Ethan. Hit me again! With that challenge hanging in the air, Saitama's entire posture shifted. In the blink of an eye, he vanished, his speed escalating to a level Ethan had never seen. No matter how hard Ethan tried to track him, the hero remained just out of reach. And then, suddenly, Saitama reappeared right beside him. His gloved hand connected with Ethan's cheek in a single, blazing strike. The friction between glove and air ignited around Saitama's fist, flames licking the edges of his red mitten like a comet's tail. Ethan barely managed to twist his head away, the shockwave rattling his skull as the attack ripped past him at hundreds of times the speed of sound. Dirt and pebbles exploded off the ground. For a heartbeat, everything was chaos. Until Ethan squared his shoulders, clenching his fists in the dust, ready for whatever Saitama would throw at him next. Ethan stared at the smoldering ruins of the city behind him, buildings reduced to rubble by that bald man's incredible palm strike. He tightened his fists and lunged forward. Got you! He snarled. Saitama's eyes curved into a lazy smile. Without warning, he punched out, the air around his fist coalescing into a roiling black mist. Ethan met the blow head-on, and their collision sent shockwaves tearing through the battlefield. Debris and dust billowed out in all directions as streaks of flame and dark haze tangled in midair, showering the ground with sparks. They traded blow after blow. Saitama unleashed a relentless barrage, each punch carrying the weight of a hurricane. Ethan moved with surprising grace, dodging, weaving, and counterattacking whenever he found an opening. Every strike he landed rattled Saitama, forcing the hero to stumble back a few paces. But Saitama only grew more animated as the fight wore on. A gleam of excitement lit his eyes. He drew back his fist and called out, "Normal punch!" In an instant, he propelled himself forward with blistering speed. The single, focused blow he delivered was infamous for obliterating dragon-tier monsters in one strike. Ethan braced himself as the air compressed around that fist, an impact that spelled certain death for anyone short of the very highest ranks of power. Ethan's strength had already surprised Saitama once before, enough to draw blood, and ever since, Saitama couldn't resist pushing himself a little harder. He still wasn't intent on killing a human opponent, but the thrill of facing someone who could actually land a solid hit was too tempting to ignore. With that in mind, Saitama planted his foot and stomped the ground with all his weight. The arena shuddered. Loose stones skittered outward like startled horses. A barrage of jagged rocks hurtled toward Ethan as if nature itself were attacking him. Unfazed, Ethan balled his right fist and swung. Pathetic, Ethan muttered. His punch detonated through the rock storm in one thunderous explosion, scattering debris in every direction. Saitama's eyes lit up at the force behind the blow. It was more than a test now. He leapt forward, closing the gap between them in an instant. They exchanged strikes so fast they blurred into a single, raging cyclone of fists and feet. Each impact rang like a bell, flesh meeting flesh with bone-jarring force. The earth cracked beneath them. Chunks of concrete flew apart, and nearby trees splintered under the shockwaves. Every punch and kick sent ripples through the air itself, twisting reality at the edges of their battle. Neither man held back. Neither man gave quarter. And as the dust and debris swirled around them, it was clear this was no longer sparring. It had become a full-scale test of wills between two of the strongest fighters the world had ever seen. Ethan and Saitama faced each other like two primeval titans, their auras crackling with raw power, neither willing to back down. In an instant, Saitama raised a single hand and caught Ethan's fist in midair. He followed through with a thunderous stomp, driving his heel into the pavement so hard that fissures spider-webbed outward and every building in the vicinity trembled. The shockwave rippled through the city, rattling windows and shaking foundations. But Ethan didn't budge. He narrowed his eyes, drew on a deeper reserve of strength, and unleashed a colossal blast that sent Saitama flying hundreds of meters away in a blur of motion. The two figures streaked across the battlefield like comets, their clash whipping the very atmosphere into a frenzy of dust and debris. Back at the Hero Association's command center, monitors that had been tracking the fight suddenly went dark. Agents and heroes exchanged alarmed glances. "Weren't we supposed to have neutralized this giant?" one asked. Although Ethan's bioforce field had confined most of the destruction to the immediate area, keeping the Earth itself from shattering, nothing on the surface was safe from his onslaught. Roads buckled, communications arrays were shredded, and contact with field teams was lost the moment Saitama reeled under Ethan's counterstrike. Now, with the battlefield silent and the screens blank, the association could only brace for whatever came next. The moment the first explosions lit up the sky, the Hero Associations scrambled every asset they had. Helicopters roared overhead and satellites swept in, but none could lock onto Ethan and Saitama. Their speeds were thousands of times faster than sound. All the cameras caught were deafening shockwaves and sudden fireballs, as if two colossi were tearing the world apart. Could that be an S-rank hero fighting a monster? Director Shi muttered, eyes widening at the raw power unfolding below. "Our energy signatures are off the charts, Director," one of the technicians reported, voice trembling. "We've never seen anything like this." Minister Shi's face drained of color. A monster that powerful? He thought back to the unknown hero who had mysteriously appeared and slain Vaccine Man without warning. The display of strength here seemed to match that same overwhelming force. "Could it be him again?" She whispered. "We can't track them," the tech team admitted. "They're moving too fast, far beyond our sensors' reach." "Then bring in Tornado immediately," she barked. If these were two unstoppable titans locked in combat, they couldn't afford to sit on the sidelines. Better to throw every hero into the fray and hope they neutralize each other before it's too late. Only two heroes could face this threat, Tornado and King. Though Ethan had seized the Vaccine Man, King, who boasted an undefeated record against Saitama, still reigned as the world's most formidable fighter. Tornado, however, no longer bristled at the mention of Vaccine Man. With no confirmed defeat in his dossier, her customary caution toward him had all but vanished. In the original timeline, Tornado had cloaked her true power behind a brusque, fearless veneer. Each time she crossed paths with King, she'd snapped orders at him, uncertain how he would handle such a monstrous enemy. But everything changed in an instant. King arrived on the scene just as Saitama's fist sent Vaccine Man sprawling, splattering him in his own blood. Without hesitation, King restrained the villain, and in that moment, his legendary courage was plain for even Tornado to see. Before she could gather her thoughts, Ethan struck. He moved like a storm wind, his fist crashing into Saitama with the force of thunder. Saitama cried out, his energy surging as he met Ethan blow for blow. Fist against fist, kick against kick, the two champions unleashed a deafening roar of impact. The very earth trembled beneath them, the shockwaves ripping through the battlefield as their titanic clash echoed like a landslide. The battle escalated with terrifying ferocity. Nearby buildings crumbled, chunks of masonry exploding into clouds of dust that choked the air. Ethan's fists thundered through the wreckage, each strike carrying enough force to level a city block. Across from him, Saitama met every blow with equal power, his own punches cleaving through steel beams and concrete as though they were paper. They traded blows in a blur of motion, each impact sending shockwaves rippling outward. The ground buckled beneath their feet. Cracks snaked across pavement as lightning split the sky overhead. With every collision of their fists, the very air seemed to quake, as if the world itself trembled in anticipation of its end. Chapter 367, Heaven and Earth Confronting Each Other. The devastation spread like wildfire through the city. Terrified survivors and the Hero Association's rescue teams fled in every direction as titanic shockwaves of energy ripped through the streets. Buildings disintegrated under the roar of collapse, and the air itself trembled with the force of the destruction. High above the ruin, Saitama hovered, streaked with blood at the corners of his mouth and along his jawline, blood that sizzled and vaporized in the blistering heat unleashed by his clash with Ethan. The searing intensity of their battle ignited something deep within him, a fierce, exhilarating passion for the fight. An aura of raw power pulsed around him, causing winds to howl and debris to dance in spirals beneath his feet. "Continuous ordinary punches," he shouted, voice echoing like thunder. Saitama's fist surged forward, enveloped in world-shaking force. Across a haze of dust and wind, Ethan met the strike with his own fist, and the impact detonated like a collapsing mountain. Cracks spiderwebbed through the ground, and a monumental wave of air swept outward, flattening everything in its path. From the cataclysmic collision, it was clear that heaven and earth themselves were locked in mortal combat. Neither warrior yielded, and neither relented, as their unparalleled strength threatened to tear the world apart. The moment their fists met, a titanic shockwave rippled outward, shaking the entire battlefield to its foundations. The sky seemed to tear open, thunderous energy crackled in the air, and the wind screamed like a living thing. Soldiers and spectators alike froze in awe, unable to tear their eyes away from the cataclysm unfolding before them. Ethan and Saitama traded blow for blow at impossible speed. Ethan's dual fists moved in perfect sync with Saitama's, each strike matched, each impact mirrored, but the sheer force behind Ethan's punches carried him just a fraction beyond his opponent's reach. It was as if volcanic pressure built within him, surging outward in every explosive jab. Saitama, ever unflappable, replied with a hurricane of attacks, each one precisely aimed at Ethan's vital points. Around them, mountains crumbled and the earth split as their titanic energies rent the land itself. The sky darkened to an otherworldly hue, and the very air seemed to vibrate with raw power. Then, in the blink of an eye, Saitama's form blurred. He coalesced into a living arrow of lightning and dove toward Ethan's flank, unleashing a single devastating blow so fast that it shattered the ground beneath them and left an echoing boom across the desolate plain. The world fell into a sudden hush, then a thunderous crack shattered the silence. Ethan's form erupted forward like a bolt of lightning, colliding with Saitama in a cataclysmic impact that sent shockwaves rippling through the city. Buildings trembled, pavement cracked, and even the sky seemed to shudder under the force of their blows. Hazy light washed over the battlefield, drowning out every other sound until only their ferocious struggle remained. Around them, plants withered at the edges of their shockwave. The ground buckled in great fissures. Observers from the Hero Association watched in awe, their eyes tracing the after-images of two titans locked in combat, so swift it left only streaks of motion in the air. Ethan drew back his arm and drove a devastating punch at Saitama's jaw. The impact rang out like a cannon shot. Saitama's head dipped, then he cracked a bright, almost effortless grin. Before anyone could blink, he thrust his fist forward. The punch burst through the atmosphere with an explosive roar, meeting Ethan's fist in midair. The collision sent a pulse of power washing outward, flattening nearby streetlights and rattling windows for blocks. Sparks of energy flickered along their fists as if the very air around them were caught in a maelstrom. Neither warrior yielded. Each blow was a testament to limitless strength, the kind of power ordinary people could only dream about. From the Hero Association's vantage point, it was impossible to distinguish their faces in the blur of motion, yet the sheer magnitude of the clash left no doubt. This was a battle for the ages. Ethan hovered high above the shattered battlefield, where furious gusts ripped up rock and debris in every direction. He struck again and again at Saitama, pounding him downward as if staking claim to the very heavens themselves, his domain, inviolable and absolute. But Saitama's eyes betrayed no fear. His usual blank stare sharpened into something resolute and clear, handsome, unyielding. With a single, effortless bound, he sprang skyward. The instant his feet touched down, the earth thundered open beneath him, ripping apart in a titanic explosion that shook the heavens. Chunks of rock rained down through the chasm's yawning maw. The two warriors collided in midair, then crashed to the ground in a whirlwind of jagged stone and searing flame. Their twisted silhouettes darted between sky and earth, every impact sending shockwaves rippling outward in deafening roars. The sheer ferocity of their exchange left onlookers awestruck. Ethan grunted, wind whipping his hair as he launched another barrage of punches. "This guy's a monster," he admitted through gritted teeth. No matter how much power he unleashed, Saitama met him blow for blow, and he still hadn't even gone all out. A feral grin spread across Ethan's face. He thrived on this kind of fight. "What's the matter?" Ethan called up into the tumult. "Feeling tired already? Want to take a break?" Saitama called out as Ethan suddenly halted, skidded to a stop, and turned back to him. "No way," Ethan replied, shaking his head with a grin. "I haven't even warmed up yet." Saitama's eyes gleamed. "Same here. Let's get serious." Ethan was the strongest opponent Saitama had ever faced, and instead of feeling provoked by his words, Saitama only grew more excited. "All right, then." Without another word, they sprang apart and then lunged back together, launching simultaneous punches. Their fists met in midair, the impact roaring like thunder and setting the very air ablaze. A scorching wave radiated outward, turning the battlefield into a seething sea of fire. They broke apart only to collide again, trading blows while tumbling through the sky. Each punch and kick struck with earth-shattering force, sending shockwaves rippling across the landscape as if someone were sweeping a giant hand over the planet's surface. Trees snapped, rocks crumbled, and the ground heaved under the onslaught. Ethan pressed forward relentlessly, his strikes a blur of power, while Saitama, smiling under the strain, retreated strategically, absorbing and redirecting the attacks. Their clash had escalated from sparring to catastrophe in moments, a titanic conflict that threatened to lay waste to everything around them. Behind them, mountains crumbled and the earth split open, as if the very sky were being torn apart. Jagged rifts formed in the clouds, resembling the bloody maws of demons. The battle had spiraled completely out of control, growing ever more ferocious. Every blow they landed felt as though it could obliterate the world itself, plunging everything into an abyss of darkness. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted between them, like the first spark of the Big Bang, growing brighter by the instant. Ethan and Saitama met in midair, fists and feet colliding with a force so tremendous that it tremored through the fabric of space. Their muscles bulged, and waves of heat radiated from their bodies, making them appear as hulking giants locked in mortal combat. Dust and debris whirled around them in a roaring whirlwind. Without warning, Ethan unleashed a rapid succession of crushing blows. Each punch carried an oppressive weight, as though capable of shattering mountains. Yet Saitama was undeterred. In a single fluid motion, he advanced half a step and delivered a titanic counterpunch. The impact detonated like a thunderclap, compressing the very air around them in an instant. For a heartbeat, everything hung in, that charged stillness, two warriors at the peak of their power, testing the limits of strength and will. Then, as the dust continued to swirl, neither showed any sign of relenting. The clash of their might was far from over. A high-pitched whistle tore through the air like a war cry. Ethan sprang off the shifting ground, his blade a streak of lightning-red fire as it met the scarlet giant head-on. A deafening boom split the sky, jagged bolts of lightning ripping through gathering clouds. The moment Ethan's strike clashed with the Colossus's blow, a cataclysmic explosion ripped the earth apart, upending soil, toppling mountains, and draining all color from the world. Chapter 368. Tornado Wants to Get Closer. Ethan's fist smashed into Saitama's jaw with bone-shaking force. Saitama reacted instantly, shooting his arms forward to catch the blow, but the sheer power behind Ethan's punch was overwhelming. In a heartbeat, the two fighters clashed with such ferocity that the air itself seemed to crack. Saitama felt as though his entire body had been plunged into a vise of liquid metal. Every muscle locked, every movement frozen. Before Saitama could recover, Ethan pressed his advantage. He swung low, then lofted a brutal uppercut that drove Saitama straight into the mountainside. The granite face trembled and cracked, sending boulders tumbling down in a cascade of stone and dust. With a roar that shook the valley, the cliff finally gave way, collapsing into a fractured ruin. High above them, a transport plane thundered across the sky. Suddenly, its rear hatch dropped open, and the pilot's voice crackled over the comms. Hero Association Command, this is Tornado. I've arrived on site. On the ramp, Tornado stepped out, hair whipping in the slipstream, her impatience practically radiating off her. Below, the battle raged on. Saitama recovered in a blur, trading blows with Ethan so powerful that the very ground quaked, sending shockwaves rippling through the shattered mountainside. The impact of Ethan's strike against Tornado rocked the battlefield, and not just the ground beneath them. Their collision shattered the earth in a widening fault line that stretched toward the horizon, and the shockwaves ripped skyward. High above, the transport aircraft shuddered in the updraft. Unidentified airflow anomaly, the radar operator shouted. The pilot's knuckles whitened on the yoke. This turbulence is tearing the fuselage apart. She's going to break up. Metal groaned, and panels threatened to peel away. Leaning out of the open hatch, Tornado frowned, then summoned a translucent emerald barrier around the plane's midsection. The shield sparked as it held back the worst of the buffeting. Enough, Tornado said, his voice tense. We're done here. Get us out of this vortex now. Roger that. The pilot slammed both throttles forward. The transport surged away, engines whining in protest as it climbed out of the maelstrom. A gasp of relief rippled through the cockpit. None of them had expected to feel the aftershocks of Ethan and Tornado's clash at 10,000 meters. The Hero Association had arranged this flight precisely because they believed the altitude would keep the pair's destructive power from reaching the aircraft. Yet here they'd been, inches from disaster. As the transport streaked into clearer air, the pilot let out a long, shaky breath. He wasn't about to stick around and test their luck again. Ethan had no idea what he'd just walked into. When fighters move at thousands of times the speed of sound, as Saitama and he could, the very air around them hardens to more than 100 times the strength of steel. Every random twitch of their limbs becomes a seismic blast. Even if they channeled just 1/10,000th of their full power through the atmosphere, instead of landing a direct hit, it would be enough to fracture continents and rip the sky apart. From the outer fringes of the stratosphere all the way down to the planet's molten core, nothing would remain unscathed. Tatsumaki felt it first in her bones, a crushing, ocean-deep pressure bearing down on her from both sides. The battlefield's air was being squeezed between two superpowered behemoths, and it had reached absurd extremes. To move even an inch, she had to fight as if she were trapped beneath crushing tides of water. If anyone dropped a slab of steel into that zone, it would smear like wet newspaper in an instant. She'd dismantled countless dragon-level threats before, but she'd never encountered opponents who needed to muster every ounce of their strength just to tear open her telekinetic shield and close the distance. Of course, every ounce here was measured against her usual output, so even that monumental effort left he wondering just how far these two mad titans could push themselves. Chapter 7. The Resonance of Power. Ethan had deliberately shown less than 1% of his abilities, just enough to paralyze onlookers, but nowhere near his true strength. He'd learned long ago that revealing his full power against someone like Tornado would end in catastrophe. Still, he wasn't prepared for what happened next. Tornado closed the distance in a blur. Even at this restrained level, a crushing psychic pressure washed over him, but beneath that familiar weight lay something far more destructive, a thunderous resonance that rattled his very bones. It felt as if a colossal drum were being struck between heaven and earth, each strike sending violent shockwaves through his organs. His knees buckled. Blood spurted from his mouth and nose. "Damn it!" he rasped, swaying under the impact. He hadn't been hurt like this since the laboratory explosion had freed him, since he'd broken the seal on his latent powers and vowed to rely on no one but himself. In all the time since, no wound had ever drawn blood. Now, for the first time, he was reeling. Without uttering a word, Tornado unleashed her next move. Ethan's mind screamed as he forced his own power skyward. A shimmering telekinetic barrier snapped into existence around him, arresting the worst of the tremors. But the drumbeat only grew louder, the vibrations more frequent. Each step she took sent fresh jolts through the shield, threatening to shatter it. Ethan squared his shoulders, grit clenching his jaw. Despite the pain, his eyes burned with determination. Tornado might have discovered a new attack, one that could shake even his hardened defenses, but he wouldn't break here. Not now, when the battle's outcome hung in the balance. He took a steadying breath and prepared to dig deeper than ever before. If Tornado wanted a war of wills, she was about to find out how far Ethan was willing to go. Boom, 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 boom. The thunderous percussion of collapsing debris echoed through the air as Tornado rocketed forward, green eyes blazing with fury. She was determined to unmask these mysterious strangers, and if they proved hostile, roast them with a meteor. Initially, she'd been ready to annihilate both of them on the spot, but Shiki had warned that one might be the legendary hero who defeated the vaccine men. Accidentally snuffing out a powerful ally would be catastrophic. First things first, confirm their identities. Below her, Ethan watched every telekinetic flicker of her advance through his enhanced vision. Tornado, can you close in on them? He called up. Don't forget, my spar with that bald guy already sent shockwaves across the city. How do you plan to break through his guard? Tornado clenched her fists as kinetic energy crackled around her. Ethan, zip it. Next move, I'm going all out. At that moment, Saitama's usual placid expression snapped into focus. A faint, rippling aura of power shimmered over his bald head as he turned to Ethan. All right, let's do this. Ethan squared his shoulders, adrenaline surging. Okay, time to get serious. A rare, curt smirk flickered on Saitama's face. Ethan had already unleashed nearly all of his power and still couldn't land a meaningful blow on Saitama. Frustration flared within him. He had no choice but to go all out. With a fierce determination, he shifted into his serious mode. At the sight of Saitama's own deadly intent, excitement sparked in Ethan's eyes. He'd been waiting for this. Never before had he witnessed such raw, unrestrained strength. Bracing himself, he launched a punch straight at Saitama. In response, Saitama's fist shot forward, and the two blows met with a deafening crack that reverberated through the air. The impact rattled the ground beneath them, sending tremors rippling outward. Nearby, Tornado, who had just swooped in to join the fray, was caught off guard by the shockwave. Her face contorted in surprise and indignation before the blast hurled her backward through the swirling dust. But Ethan and Saitama did not pause. They pushed off from the earth and clashed again, their speed accelerating with each exchange. Every movement carved streaks of light through the air. Sparks flew where their fists collided. The sheer force of their combat seemed to warp the very atmosphere around them. A colossal tornado of debris and dust spiraled upward, as if the world itself was being torn apart. Then Saitama seized the initiative. In a heartbeat, he gathered all his strength into a single, devastating punch. The impact shattered boulders, sent rocks and soil screaming into the sky, and cracked nearby mountainsides. The thunderous roar of destruction echoed like a judgment upon the battlefield. As dust and rubble settled, it was clear this was the might of a hero and a challenger, pushed beyond their limits. Ethan's ears rang with the endless roar of collapsing stone. Rivers and seas seemed to invert as sky and earth crumbled beneath an unimaginable force. City streets buckled and heaved, and massive boulders shattered into clouds of dust. The devastation wrought by the towering adversary had already been immense, but when the two of them clashed, the ruin only deepened, spreading like wildfire through the shattered remains of the city. Chapter 369, Saitama Wants More Training. Ethan and Saitama's blows met in midair, fists and feet colliding with a deafening roar that rippled through the very atmosphere. Each strike seemed to shake heaven and earth, the ground split with jagged fissures radiating outward from their point of impact. Above them, the sky darkened abruptly, as if an otherworldly storm were brewing. What's going on? Where is Tornado? Director Shiki muttered, eyes wide as he watched the supernatural display. I can't reach her, the technician stammered, panic edging his voice. All contact with Tornado has been lost. Lost contact? Shiki's heart pounded. He struggled to imagine what kind of threat could sever communications so completely. A god-level monster, perhaps. There seemed no other explanation. Tornado, after all, was the Hero Association's fiercest weapon, famous for single-handedly annihilating Dragon-class threats. Blast. The #1 S-class hero remained a phantom, and King, Earth's strongest fighter, answered only the call of his own curiosities, ignoring every official summons. Yet now, even Tornado was unreachable. Meanwhile, back on the makeshift arena, Saitama grinned broadly, gloves dusty from countless exchanges. All right, I want more practice, he declared, launching another playful assault at Ethan. Ethan braced himself, a determined smile on his face. Whatever turmoil raged beyond their battlefield, here and now, it was just two fighters testing their limits. Each strike echoed not only their strength, but their unspoken resolve to become stronger, no matter the cost. Only Tornado had the power to handle this, and just as predictably, she suddenly went off the grid. The chaotic magnetic fields and warped gravity at the epicenter had knocked out all radio communications. One moment, the world around her blazed white. The next, everything felt eerily silent. Tornado tore toward the source of the disturbance, her heart racing. What she found was unimaginable, a gargantuan pit yawning in the earth, wide enough to swallow several cities and so deep its bottom vanished into darkness. There were no bodies, no wreckage, no clues, no sign of who had won or who had lost. Fearing that the unknown hero might have stumbled into this abyss and become trapped, Tornado braced herself. Gathering every ounce of her telekinetic strength, she formed an invisible barrier across the rim to keep loose rock from falling, and then propelled herself downward, determined to rescue whoever might lie at the bottom. In a hospital miles away, Saitama lay swathed in bandages from a recent battle. Though bruised, he sat up the moment the door opened and broke into a wide grin when he saw Ethan step inside. "You're incredible," he said, voice bright despite his own injuries. "I've never seen anyone hit like that and keep going." Ethan watched impassively as Saitama glared at him. So what? Ethan thought. Wasn't it only natural that he was strong? Their last clash had been nothing short of cataclysmic. First, Saitama's relentless barrage had vaporized tens of trillions of tons of Earth in the blink of an eye. Then, when Ethan finally stopped holding back, he landed a single, perfectly placed strike that sent the bald hero hurtling around the globe more than 100 times before gently setting him down. Of course, Ethan had no desire to turn Earth into a molten wasteland, or send Saitama screaming off into deep space, so he cloaked himself in a biological force field. The result? A scenic, high-speed tour of the planet's circumference, and little more. When it was over, Saitama lay defeated, his body swathed in bandages. "I've decided," Saitama declared, struggling to his feet. "I'm going to keep training." It was a curious turnaround. After all, ever since Saitama first discovered his invincibility, he'd grown lazy, so certain of victory that he'd abandoned his daily workouts altogether. But now, bruised and bandaged, he was back to pushing himself to extremes. If he could do 100 push-ups in a second, why not aim for 100 in a microsecond? Ethan raised an eyebrow. Perhaps his rival truly had rediscovered his drive. And if that was the case, Ethan would relish every moment of the challenge. Ethan couldn't help but smirk. If someone could cover 100 kilometers at hundreds of times the speed of sound, they certainly wouldn't worry about sprinting 100 meters in a single second. Just look at Saitama. The anime itself shows both his past, scrawny self and his current unstoppable form side by side, only for the present-day hero to nonchalantly toss his old body aside. That all-out dedication to training is precisely why his strength kept skyrocketing. Had he followed a normal workout routine, even with the limiter removed, his gains would have been marginal at best. He'd never attain the ridiculous power Saitama has. Ethan fell silent. His curiosity about Saitama had run its course. Sure, breaking the limiter sounded impressive, but Ethan didn't need to envy it. His power gem already granted him whatever abilities he desired. Saitama might be a unique life form, perhaps the only one in the entire multiverse with no limiter, but compared to Ethan's own potential, That seemed small potatoes. After all, with a single sip of the Sentinel elixir, Ethan could channel the energy of 1,000,000 exploding stars. Ethan watched the horizon thoughtfully. It's only a matter of time before Saitama outstrips even the Sentinel, he mused. The terrifying thing about this power is its limitless growth. If Saitama keeps evolving without bound, who can say whether he'll eventually transcend his own universe or remain trapped within it? By contrast, Ethan's own genetic makeup combined Kryptonian physiology with Broly's berserker strength and Doomsday's adaptive evolution. He'd never faced the constraints of a single universe ceiling. It's insane, he admitted to himself. I'm actually getting stronger this fast? Not long ago, when Ethan had first ascended to the rank of a universe-level demonic god, his rate of advancement slowed almost to a crawl. But today, after barely a handful of push-ups, his power skyrocketed again, an explosive surge that reminded him of a king's sudden counterstrike against a Super Saiyan Sun Wukong. Infinite growth. In the world of One Punch Man, it was the ultimate trump card. Now, Ethan's next move was to share this gift with others. With the Book of Ethan, anyone could become a mage, wield magic, and stand against monsters without ever needing to rely on heroes. He smiled, convinced of his own righteousness. After all, what was more good than giving everyone the power to protect themselves? Although lending souls might sound sinister, Ethan would never resort to Mephistophelian tactics, signing a pact only to stage accidents that kill his clients and steal their souls. Sure, it's quick, but it's downright evil, and Ethan despises such cruelty. He'd never force someone to linger until their appointed hour just to claim their spirit at the last second. That's not how an immortal behaves. Those desperate to dispatch their patrons are nothing more than nouveau riche brutes. Ethan's true purpose is to protect humanity. By granting mortals the power to stand against monsters, he levels the playing field. After all, there are only a few thousand heroes in the world, far too few to safeguard every town under the endless shadows. That's why he steps in. Lately, the Hero Association has seized the public's imagination thanks to Ethan's spectacular duel with Saitama. Whether it's the clash of that mysterious champion with a rampaging beast or the infighting among creatures of legend, it's clear there are horrors beyond anyone's wildest nightmares, and only those empowered by Ethan can hope to confront them. Tornadoes scoured the site but turned up nothing, and he was furious. All that remained was that enormous crater. The Hero Association had already moved to suppress any news, but their real dilemma was how to handle this massive hole. After all, meteorite impact sites often look innocuous only because nature has spent tens of thousands of years softening and eroding their edges. A fresh crater, by contrast, can trigger severe soil erosion and radically alter the surrounding terrain. Chapter 370, Monster Cell's Magic? Overnight, the world of One Punch Man awoke to a startling shift. Magicians had appeared. At first, they were dismissed as little more than street performers, until they began quelling the bizarre monster cell disasters plaguing the cities. I saw it with my own eyes, one bystander exclaimed. A tiger-level catastrophe was unfolding when this mage, Hakimi, stepped in. He opened Ethan's book, spoke an incantation, and just like that, the threat vanished. News of these feats spread like wildfire. The Heroes Association, already tracking monster cell outbreaks, seized on the footage. Every citywide calamity ended at the hands of these mysterious spellcasters. But the relief was short-lived. Soon, reports emerged that certain magicians were using their powers to rob banks and terrorize wealthy neighborhoods. Panic rippled through the affluent circles. If magic could crack vaults, no one felt safe. Ethan, the original author of that fabled grimoire, wasn't surprised by the turn toward crime. He'd handed out Ethan's book freely to idlers like Taoyuan Tuan, people content to skip work altogether and indulge in drink, food, and endless revelry. After all, why earn a living when you could simply conjure your desires? And so, the world found itself caught between two extremes. Heroic sorcerers saving lives one day, rogue magicians striking terror the next. For the Heroes Association, and for Ethan himself, the true challenge was only beginning. The quickest solution they could devise for raising funds was to rob a bank. At the same time, the Hero Association had become obsessed with what they now called the Book of Ethan, a grimoire with no barriers to entry. Simply by laying eyes on its pages, anyone could master magic. With monstrous threats on the rise, the association was desperate for more heroes, and Ethan's book was exactly the answer they needed. Whether they fully understood the risks or not, the wealthy patrons behind the association weren't going to let caution stand in their way. They immediately dispatched search parties, determined to recover every copy. Incredibly, Ethan had already produced copies wholesale. He handed them out to anyone he met, and, when he didn't have time to distribute them by hand, merely dropped piles of books from the sky. Faced with this flood of grimoires, the association's agents found it all but impossible to confiscate or destroy every copy. Word spread quickly, and shrewd mages began hiding their volumes. After all, a sorcerer in possession of the Book of Ethan was infinitely more powerful than one without it, and once its secrets were out, there was no turning back. Ethan held the grimoire firmly in his hands, feeling its power surge through him. High-speed divine word, double casting, enhanced spell power, rapid mana recovery, 4 potent buffs, each one granted by this arcane tome. Ordinary mages had no choice but to rely on raw talent and grueling study, but the wealthy, the cunning, and the ambitious had quietly stashed away hundreds of copies. They feared that, if the Book of Ethan ever fell into general use, an army of powerful spellcasters would rise up overnight. Already, more than 1,000 magic users had manifested around the globe. Yet in this world, where specters flitted about like stray dogs and dragons soared overhead, they were prey. A single lethal encounter could end an unprepared sorcerer in an instant. Sooner or later, all would perish. And as quickly as he'd changed the balance of power, Ethan reminded himself of where he truly belonged. He no longer obsessed over disseminating the book. Instead, he had journeyed to Z City, Saitama's stomping grounds, known far and wide as the City of Monsters. Ghost-level fiends prowled its alleys, dragon-level beasts laid siege to its outskirts, but where monsters multiplied, the bald devil reigned supreme. In Z City, no oddity could survive more than a day. From the shadows, Sykes watched the city's defenses. As a high-ranking officer of the Monster Association, he felt invincible, so confident, in fact, that he placed the entire organization directly under the nose of the world's mightiest hero and didn't even realize it. Each morning he'd report to his superiors, unaware that Saitama's quiet vigil held the power to crush them all. Yet neither mage nor monster, no matter how powerful, truly understood the limits of their strength. And in Zed City, power was nothing without the will to use it. As Ethan stepped into the neon-lit streets, the air thrummed with tension. Somewhere beyond the skyline, Saitama was waiting, and in that moment, every spell, every monster, every hidden grimoire would be tested in the crucible of the bald devil's indomitable grace. Ethan leaned against the cold steel wall of the lab, eyes narrowed. If word ever reached Saitama, the entire weird association would collapse, its members scattered, its schemes exposed. But Ethan wasn't here to worry about the association's fate. He'd come for one prize, and one prize only. The weirdo cells. Capturing the rank-and-file operatives? Pointless. If necessary, he could level the entire deep-sea tribe without breaking a sweat. He recalled how Saitama had annihilated the deep-sea tribe in those underground races. Only after their champion fell did the survivors dare emerge onto shore. Their so-called underground man might not have rivaled the legendary god-level underground king of myth, but he'd still outclassed the deep-sea king by a wide margin. A genuine ghost-tier weirdo. Inside the lab, Sykes was hunched over a cluttered desk, oblivious to Ethan's arrival. With all the confidence of a man completely in control, Ethan strode past the startled guard, crossed the floor in 3 long strides, and yanked the inventory ledger from Sykes's trembling hands. This ledger cataloged every captive, every experiment, every twisted mutation the association had ever produced. On his way out, Ethan glanced into a nearby holding cell. A hulking figure in battle-worn armor sat slumped against the wall, a human hero, still human for the moment. Later, the association would convert him into a weirdo and add him to their roster of abominations. Ethan barely registered the scene. Crushing Long Xiao's Baoshan had been an impressive feat, but it proved nothing about a hero's true limits. He slipped the ledger under his arm and headed for the exit. Even the mightiest hero, Ethan thought, might crumble before an Asura. After all, Saitama had admitted he felt nothing against that form. With every step, Ethan knew he was sealing the weird association's doom and securing the cells that held their greatest secret. Ethan slipped away without a word, confident that his plan was already in motion. Behind him, Sykes didn't even notice his departure as he tapped at his datapad. "Contact the martial arts masters and swordsmen of the Sword Saint Association," Sykes ordered. "They're prime candidates, and dispatch our Weird Cell unit immediately. Find that ventricular incision fellow." He glanced over at the captive hero, a man who'd once been a solid ghost-level fighter in an ordinary human body, now cowering in a skimpy school swimsuit uniform beside Monster King Orochi. Against a dragon-tier monster, he didn't stand a chance, and the sheer terror on his face spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Ethan re-emerged in the Marvel Universe laboratory, carrying a case brimming with hundreds of vials. He laid them out before Genos and their commanding officer. "Here they are," Ethan said. "These weird cells you asked for. Is this really how we turn someone into a weirdo?" Genos stared at the samples, repulsed by the notion of warping humans into grotesque anomalies. Yet despite his misgivings, curiosity flickered in his eyes. After all, Ethan had promised that these cells possessed untold and possibly terrifying power. Chapter 12. The Power of Monster Cells. Ethan watched in disbelief as Dr. Sekis carefully removed the final sample from the containment chamber. "Monster cells don't come from just any creature," Sekis explained, his voice eerily calm. "They're harvested only from King Snake, a bee, whose very blood defies natural law. Once we isolate and cultivate these cells, they can turn a human into something otherworldly." Behind Sekis, glass vials glowed with an iridescent green. Each held enough monster cells to alter a person's physiology in minutes. Ethan's heart pounded. He'd heard rumors about these cells, but never dreamed he'd see them in person. The next morning, opening day of the Grand Martial Arts Conference, Ethan joined hundreds of spectators in the stadium. Competitors from all corners of the realm had gathered to prove their strength, skill, and honor. But the real excitement came when Haoji, a feared warlord known for his ruthless tactics, strode into the arena, clutching a leather satchel. "Behold!" Haoji boomed, dumping several glowing vials onto the platform. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "These are Sekis's monster cells. Take them, and you'll transcend human limits. Refuse, and you forfeit your right to fight here." Some warriors laughed in contempt. Others eyed the vials nervously. When Haoji scowled, a few less experienced fighters reluctantly stepped forward. Ethan recognized one of them, Li Tao, a young martial artist whose constitution was said to be no stronger than a common laborer's. A cruel smile tugged at Haoji's lips as he handed Li Tao a single vial. "Drink," he ordered. Li Tao hesitated only a heartbeat before uncapping the vial and downing it in one gulp. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his muscles quivered, his veins bulged beneath his skin, and a deep, throaty roar escaped his lips. The crowd gasped. Li Tao's frame swelled, sinewy cords of muscle rippled down his arms and legs. Where before his strength had been no greater than a wolf's, he now stood with the raw power of a tiger. He gripped the earth with his fists, cracking the concrete floor. Ethan felt a chill. The transformation was astonishing and completely side-effect-free. Li Tao didn't writhe in pain or collapse. He simply stood there, eyes blazing, breathing heavily but evenly, as though reborn. Haoji clapped slowly. "This," he announced, "is the future of martial arts. Monster cells bypass years of training and refinement. With them, you become a living weapon in an instant." Some warriors rushed forward, vials in hand. Others retreated in horror. Ethan gripped the railing, torn between fear and fascination. These cells were dangerous beyond measure, but to a fighter desperate for an edge, they were irresistible. As Li Tao raised his fists to accept Haoji's challenge, Ethan realized the conference had shifted. It was no longer merely a test of skill. It had become a battleground for unnatural power. And somewhere in the shadows, Ethan knew the true cost of monster cells was waiting to be revealed. Ethan stood among the fighters at the martial arts conference, watching as they activated the powers hidden within the monster cells they'd just swallowed. Everyone, except for Explosion Mountain, who'd overindulged and was now clutching his stomach, triggered their enhancements instantly. By the standard monster-level rankings, most competitors fell into the tiger or demon tiers. Even Bakuzan, whose rank stubbornly lingered at dragon level, still carried the prestige of a dragon tier warrior. Ethan sat quietly as Hao Jie outlined the true power and risk of monster cell serums. When a hero ingests these cells, Hao Jie explained, their strength jumps one entire tier. Take my case. I was once champion of the martial arts conference, but after the serum, I shot up to dragon class levels. He smiled confidently. I believe Shuilong could do the same. If he can handle the dosage, there's no doubt he'll breach dragon class too, and he'd easily outmatch any ghost class creature. Ethan raised an eyebrow. No complications? Nobody's ever failed? Hao Jie shook his head. Almost everyone succeeds, except Sonic. At the mention of that name, the room tensed. Sonic was infamous, a villain, yes, but not entirely without honor. Driven by ambition, he meticulously prepared his dose. He braised the monster cells in red wine as though cooking a fine steak, then ate them. The result was far from epic power. Instead, Sonic suffered violent bouts of diarrhea. His body simply rejected the cells. Ethan absorbed the warning. The promise of dragon-class strength was real, but so was the danger of a complete meltdown, literally, for anyone careless enough to tinker with these volatile serums. Ethan stared at the crimson vials lined up before him. The shimmering liquid inside was known simply as monster cells, a substance so volatile it had to be kept alive, or else it turned into nothing more than foul, rotting flesh. He remembered how Sonic had mishandled a dose and wound up with a severe bout of diarrhea. By sheer luck, he'd survived without killing anyone. But even in its raw, uncooked state, monster cells were extraordinarily potent. A single injection could amplify a human's physical strength 100-fold. Ethan had studied every scrap of the original plot notes, and one thing was clear. These cells carried a terrible price. Hao Ji's own experiments provided grim proof. The dozen black-feathered crows that once besieged the water dragon weren't beasts at all, but Hao Ji's disfigured apprentices. After consuming monster cells, they had indeed grown monstrously strong, but at the cost of their sanity. They screamed in madness before tearing each other apart. And then there was Bakuzan, Hao Ji's prized warrior. He devoured so many cells that his body simply gave out. His death had come as no surprise to Hao Ji, who had warned that the cells carried two inescapable side effects, sudden death and irreversible loss of reason. Ethan drew in a deep breath as he closed the cabinet. From this day forward, Hydra's flagship product would no longer be the reptile serum, the werewolf serum, or the bat serum. Monster cells would be their marquee creation and their deadliest weapon. A twisted smile lifted Ethan's lips. This was the genesis of true chaos. But first things first. He'd let Genos handle the immediate fallout of the monster cell trials. Tomorrow, the world would tremble at Hydra's newest innovation. Ethan, the enigmatic leader known as Lord Black Caesar, had barely given monster cells a second thought, until he dug into the data and seen their true potential. Fuse them with a host, and the subject's strength and resilience could skyrocket. That idea aligned perfectly with Galvatron's own ambitions for power. But everything shifted when Ethan watched Genos at work. Rather than directly infusing himself with Hulk DNA, Genos had started from a cloned human template, outfitted it with cutting-edge cybernetics, and turned it into an unbeatable bodyguard. A light bulb went off in Ethan's mind. Why endure the agony of genetic fortification when he could simply inhabit a cloned vessel and become his own enforcer? He'd always been drawn to Hulk cell enhancements, but perhaps combining monster cells with a Hulk clone would yield the ultimate warrior. By the way, Lord Black Caesar, Genos said, stepping forward in his precise mechanical cadence, that ultimate steroid serum you retrieved isn't a steroid at all. It's actually an ultra-concentrated nutrient solution. After my refinements, it easily meets, surpass, the energy requirements of any living organism, especially a super life form like you. Ethan shook his head, expression inscrutable. I don't need energy supplements, he replied coolly. Genos blinked, convinced that Ethan must eat prodigious amounts of food to fuel his devastating power output. What the cyborg failed to grasp was that Ethan transcended ordinary biology. He didn't require extra calories or chemical boosters. He simply basked in sunlight, drawing raw energy directly into his cells. Even without basking in sunlight, Ethan's energy levels remained rock solid. Genos pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, his eyes narrowing. You really don't need any high-energy supplements? That doesn't make sense. Unless, he trailed off, shaking his head, unless you've somehow evolved to rely solely on system charging. But even the best solar array couldn't sustain that kind of output. He turned to Ethan with a more encouraging expression. All right, focus on those monster cells. You've got my full confidence. Ethan glanced at Kinos. Boss, I believe we can take this even further. Weaponize the monster cells. Kinos frowned, but before he could reply, the Hydra director stepped forward. Don't call it weaponization. We're talking productization. I want a cultivation method that's completely uncrackable. No reverse engineering, no unauthorized copies. The last thing I need is half a dozen rivals pretending they've got Hydra's edge. Ethan inclined his head. Understood. We'll put a technical barrier in place. First, we'll master the cell culture process with using any genetic samples from King Orochi himself. Then, we'll lock down the protocol so no one else can replicate it. Look, I don't care if the cells themselves end up in circulation, but I won't let anyone steal our research. This is Hydra's exclusive domain. Ethan tapped his fingers against the conference table, eyes cold as steel. If anyone even thinks about cornering my market, he warned, voice low, I'll authorize my action division to make it look like a domestic terror attack. Across the table sat two of the finest minds from different universes, Genos, the cutting-edge cyborg scientist, and the man they all called the Big Boss. It had taken them only a few months to fulfill Ethan's demanding specifications. He'd expected nothing less. Meanwhile, in the Marvel universe, New York City stood defiantly unscathed. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, Wilson Kingpin Fisk surveyed his sprawling criminal empire. Across the continent, Los Angeles had endured invasion after invasion, first by extraterrestrial forces, then caught in the crossfire of a sudden war between the Illuminati and a brutal Saiyan horde. That conflict came perilously close to spilling into New York, but the city's legendary feng shui held firm. The Saiyans were ultimately routed before they could set foot on Broadway. Boss! James Wesley, Fisk's ever-faithful aide and financial overseer, stepped into the office, hands conspicuously empty. Fisk inhaled the rich smoke from his cigar, exhaled, then frowned at Wesley's vacant grip. Talk to me, he said. Wesley cleared his throat. I just got off the line with Hydra. He hesitated, then continued. They've decided to discontinue all their enhancement serums, lizard, werewolf, even the bat serum. No more sales, no exceptions. Silence followed, save for the hiss of the cigar and the distant hum of Manhattan traffic. Fisk's face tightened into a mask of disbelief. Hydra's out of the serum business? Wesley nodded, eyes flicking nervously to the windows. Effective immediately. They claim it's for strategic realignment, whatever that means. Fisk crushed his cigar stub in the ashtray, sparks flying. A sudden chill flowed through his marble-floored lair. Losing access to Hydra's serums threatened to upend every operation he'd spent decades perfecting. Yet beneath the shock, a spark of dark amusement glinted in his steel-blue gaze. All right, he said, voice low and dangerous. If Hydra won't sell, we'll make our own, or find someone who will. Wesley swallowed. Shall I inform R&D? Inform them, Fisk replied, steepling his fingers. And get me a list of every rogue chemist and underground supplier in the tri-state area. We'll take our business wherever it goes next, serum, secrets, or steel. Wesley bowed and retreated, leaving Fisk alone with the city lights. He turned back to the glass, watching the traffic flow like a river of possibility. New York had weathered every storm so far. Now, it was his turn to shape the future, by any means necessary. Kingpin sat back in his leather chair, the soft glow of the city skyline reflecting off his polished desk. He'd just finished another report on Hydra's illicit serum trade, and it was grim reading. Since Hydra began peddling their serum as a form of hard currency, it had become more valuable than conventional arms. Even Tony Stark's crack units found it nearly impossible to stem the flow. In every black market from Shanghai to São Paulo, Hydra's serum was not only accepted, it was preferred. Wesley, Kingpin's intelligence chief, cleared his throat. They've introduced something new, he said, voice low, and I haven't been able to verify it yet, which is why I wanted to see you. Kingpin raised an eyebrow. What have they launched this time? Wesley spread a dossier across the desk. They're calling it monster cells. It's not just another serum. While the old formula could augment strength and heal wounds, think lizard folk and werewolves armed with battlefield-grade enhancements, the new product is entirely different. Kingpin leafed through grainy surveillance photos. Go on. Monster cells, Wesley explained, tap directly into a subject's latent potential. In some cases, users mutate into hulking, near-invulnerable brutes, what Hydra's propaganda dubs green hulks. In others, the process goes catastrophically wrong. Sudden organ failure, psychotic breaks, outright bestial transformations. No one knows the failure rate for sure, but estimates run as high as 40%. Kingpin's steepled fingers hovered over the dossier. So they're essentially playing genetic roulette, turning soldiers into superweapons at the risk of them becoming uncontrollable monsters. Exactly, Wesley said grimly. And because it's brand new, demand is through the roof. Mercenary outfits are queuing up, willing to pay millions per dose, even without guarantees. Kingpin leaned forward, eyes alight with ruthless calculation. Then it's time we got in line, he said. Arrange a secure sample. I want to know precisely what Hydra's cooking and how we can weaponize it better. Wesley nodded and stood. As he left, Kingpin stared at the dossier once more, the flicker of ambition in his gaze, promising that whatever came next, he would seize it first. Kingpin realized in that moment that Hydra never intended to deploy the serum themselves. Everyone knew how tenacious Hydra's black market trade in the serum was, and how difficult it was to disrupt. And as for where the United States had obtained its own supply of the serum, that too was no secret. Chapter 372, Lending Loki a Hand. Hydra's reign of terror has made the organization an international pariah, and America hates them more than anyone. After the Ultron catastrophe, when Tony Stark's robots went rogue and slaughtered countless civilians, the public's faith in Stark tech was shattered. Now, Washington is desperate for any alternative that can turn the tide. Lizard serums, werewolf serums, anything that can create an army of super soldiers. The original super soldier serum produced only two beings, Captain America and the Red Skull, and every attempt since has ended in failure. With Hydra's network of secret labs still churning out experiments, the United States is considering a radical move: buy their monster serums wholesale. Officials figure that if Hydra has built a backdoor into the formula, America's top scientists will find and neutralize it. Tonight, in his secluded Manhattan penthouse, Wilson Fisk, the kingpin of crime, sat across from his lead scientist, Dr. Wesley Deng. Wesley had just returned from a clandestine Hydra facility, carrying vials of what they called weird cells, genetically engineered amphibian tissue, rumored to catalyze the serum into something far more powerful. How much are they asking for these cells? Fisk's voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of an unspoken threat. Wesley tapped a holo display. Hydra's demanding $50 million, paid up front. They want guaranteed delivery to Washington, no questions asked. Fisk leaned back, steepling his fingers. A slow smile spread across his face. $50 million is a small price to pay when the U.S. government ends up owing me a favor. And what about Loki? Will this serum stabilize him? Dr. Deng nodded. Loki's physiology is tricky. Half god, half frost giant, but these cells could give him the edge he needs to hold his own on Midgard. It's a chance we can't pass up. Then make the arrangements, Fisk said. Wire the funds tonight. I want every vial delivered through our channels. No Hydra operatives setting foot in the city. Understood? Understood, Wesley replied. As the deal was sealed, Fisk watched the city lights below. Hydra thought they ruled the world. Tony Stark had lost his luster, and even the Avengers were on edge. But now, with a fresh supply of super soldier serum and a powerful ally in the trickster god, Fisk was about to rewrite the rules of engagement, on his terms. And in the shadows beyond the penthouse windows, other players were already moving. Soon, every piece on the board would be in play. Ethan had been the first to request the Lizardman serum. Even after Hydra confiscated $1 billion of his laundered funds, Kingpin still walked away with a hefty profit from those 10 precious vials. Selling them not only fattened his coffers, but also reinforced his grip on the city. When the Lizardmen themselves erupted into violent riots, Kingpin didn't hesitate to unleash his own Lizardman battalions to crush the uprising and restore order on the streets of New York. It may sound absurd, an underworld emperor who doubles as a city caretaker, But under Kingpin's rule, crime and chaos remain tightly controlled. "They're asking for $10 million, Wesley reported, eyebrows raised. "That's a steal compared to the price of the serum." Hydra, for its part, is ready to extend loans up to $100 million. But any lizardman who fails to repay within 2 years watches their debt swell under ruthless compound interest. For the first 24 months, they must fork over $10,000 each month. Miss the 2-year deadline, and the monthly payment jumps to $40,000, and there's no escaping the bill, not even in death. The collectors will come for you. Ethan sat back as the meeting room fell silent. Across the polished conference table, Kingpin Barons leaned forward, tapping the mahogany surface with a gold-encased pen. "If our clients don't clear their invoices within the next year," Barons said, his voice low but hard, "they'll owe us $80,000 every month after that. That alone ensures our supply of Lizardman serum will stay in tight hands. Only the biggest, most serious buyers can afford it." He paused, glancing around the room. "And none of them dare stiff Hydra. Our accounting department enforces every penny. You cross Hydra, you don't just lose credit, you lose everything." Ethan nodded. The Lizardman serum had never been a mass-market product. Each vial was a major transaction, and rumored to be in such limited supply that those who'd been placing orders recently had simply vanished into the criminal underground. Now, with Hydra's next offering on the table, he could see why. "Now that we've sold out the 1 million doses of werewolf serum," Barons continued, "we're phasing out all other serums. From this point forward, the only thing we're selling is the weird cell, at $10 million per sample." 10 million. The figure echoed in Ethan's mind like thunder, a price that would make even the wealthiest warlords pause. But enemy bioengineers and rogue militaries all wanted access to these anomalous cells. Whoever controlled them would dominate any biowarfare or enhancement market on the planet. Kingpin Barons stood. His tailored suit didn't wrinkle as he draped a leather briefcase on the table. "Wesley," he said, pointing to his chief financial officer, "I want you to take every dollar we've got and lock down as many weird cells as possible. No exceptions." Wesley flicked open the case, revealing stacks of unmarked bills. "Understood. I'll wire the transfers immediately." Across the city and beyond, every faction that had relied on Hydra's golden reputation sat up and took notice. The day of cheap, dependable serums was over. From here on out, Hydra would deal only in the ultimate high-stakes commodity, monster cells. Some of their old clients balked, unwilling to gamble on something so untested. But Hydra's brand meant quality, and quality sold, even at 10 million a vial. Ethan stood alone in his hidden chamber, utterly confident in the havoc his new chaos cells would unleash. He believed he could replicate and even surpass the breakthroughs Genos and Big Boss had fought so hard to achieve. All he needed was the power of the Imperial Dimension to do it. After all, it was the same source that, channeling the energy of the Scarlet Dimension through Cytorax Ruby, had forged the legendary Red Tank, nearly indestructible and devastating in direct assaults. Dormammu had tapped the Dark Dimension for his own power, and Mephisto had stolen fire from the underworld to create the Ghost Rider. Why not let the Imperial Dimension mutate living cells into monstrous, raging weapons and unlock hidden potential in anyone who consumed them? The price, Ethan knew, would be steep. Those transformed by his chaos cells would owe not just their strength but their very souls to him. Yet he found that a small price to pay when compared to the slow spread of his arcane tomes. In theory, the magic books cultivated steadier, more reliable souls, but they required time and allegiance. Mutations, in contrast, would be immediate and terrifyingly unpredictable. He reminded himself that this was Earth in the Marvel universe, where every human being was already a living experiment of the Celestials. Why shouldn't he push them a little further? With the Imperial Dimension at his command, Ethan would unleash a new era of power, one fueled by chaos, bound by blood, and sealed by the surrender of every transformed soul. Ethan watched the two objects hovering before him, their otherworldly glow casting shifting shadows across the crumbling stone. According to ancient records, the Kree's experiments on Earth had given birth to the Inhumans, and, unexpectedly, caught the attention of the Celestials. Rather than destroy the planet, the Celestials left behind a hidden failsafe, a means for humanity to harness unimaginable power should the need arise. That, they decided, explained why humans mutate so readily and why our world has produced more heroes and villains of cosmic caliber than any ought. Our very DNA was the perfect soul material, and unlocking it required only a tithe of energy drawn from the Empire dimension. Weird cells. Sounds too bland, Ethan muttered. Devil fruits. That's more like it. At his command, a quivering violet-hued cell appeared in his right hand, its surface alive with raw, pulsing energy. In his left hand materialized a grotesque fruit, mottled and veined as though it were a living organism. Both were condensed shards of his empire's dimensional power, tools capable of awakening latent abilities, triggering monstrous transformations, and absorbing ambient energy. For ordinary people, such gifts were irresistible. One bite, and you could shatter the limits of humanity in a single bound. The price? A monstrous form, an exchange, Ethan suspected, few would hesitate to make. Far to the north, along the hidden borderlands of Wakanda, a darker alliance took shape. Loki, the god of mischief, had forged a secret partnership with Ultron. Through back-channel deals with Black Caesar's Hydra, Loki had acquired vials of lizardman and werewolf serums to bolster Hydra's armies. Now Ultron's factories never cooled, churning out legions of near-indestructible war machines by the hour. With devil fruits in one hand and mutant serums in the other, the balance of power on Earth was shifting, and Ethan held both keys. Ethan watched from the tree line as the two Black Caesar battalions advanced on Wakanda with unwavering confidence. For a moment, he almost laughed. After all, in most stories, Wakanda still looks like a tribe fighting with spears, their king chosen by brutal duels. But the sonorous hum now filling the sky told a different tale. A translucent dome of crackling vibranium energy enveloped the capital below, rendering Ultron drones and even Loki's magical assaults useless. He slipped closer to Loki's side, concealed by the shadow of a towering acacia. Captain Marvel had already whisked away Pierce, leaving only the other supreme lieutenants of the Snakeheads as Loki's bodyguards. Loki, arms folded, stared at the gleaming shield, his lips curling into a patient smile. Technology, he knew, was no match for true sorcery, but with Wakanda's defenses encrypted and fiercely monitored, he dared not trespass alone. Ethan cleared his throat softly. "Your Majesty," he murmured, voice low enough for only Loki to hear. "Black Caesar's main force is here, right on our doorstep." Loki turned, eyes narrowing in surprise. He had scoured every province, every hidden tunnel, and found no trace of Black Caesar's men. And yet here they were, marching straight into Wakanda under his command. "Oh," Loki's tone was cool amusement. "I suppose this changes everything, does it not?" Ethan nodded. He'd volunteered to guide Loki past the energy shield's weakest points. If they could bypass or collapse even a fraction of it, the path into Wakanda would open. And once inside, Loki's magic would finish what mechanical weapons could not. Across the valley, two armies braced themselves. Within the shield, Wakanda's warriors readied their vibranium-tipped spears. And between both forces, Ethan and Loki made their final preparations for the most dangerous infiltration either had ever attempted. "I'd be happy to help. Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the complete original, I can revise it into a polished, coherent English version with your specified changes." Chapter 373, The Monster Cell Gift. Loki allowed himself a triumphant smile. Finally, he'd caught them. But the victory was short-lived. As he strode forward, he realized that Black Caesar's men were not men at all, but automatons. His Mind Scepter, which only controlled living creatures, went utterly useless, and before he could warn Ultron to seize them, the robots detonated themselves in a blinding flash. When the smoke cleared, a massive crate, easily big enough to hold a few hundred basketballs, lay in the rubble, its outer panels intact. A rush of dry ice fog poured from its seams, hissing across the floor. "Your Majesty, watch out!" the Hydra lieutenants called, bowing low in deference. Loki merely circled the container, curiosity sharpening his features. With a mechanical whir, hydraulic pistons in the crate began to push its two halves apart. The top panel slid upward, revealing the contents within. Inside lay a writhing mass of grotesque black growths, tumor-like blobs that pulsed and squirmed as if they were alive. A foul stench hung in the air, and Loki instinctively took a step back. Black Caesar was notorious for chemical and biological weapons research. Were these blobs some kind of viral pathogen? Before he could ponder further, a holographic projector mounted inside the crate flickered to life, bathing the chamber in an eerie green glow. On the floating screen, a masked figure appeared, their voice dripping with mock civility. "Nice to meet you, God of Mischief. Welcome to your new plaything." The image winked out, leaving the dry ice to swirl around Loki's feet and the grotesque lifeforms to writhe in silence. A trap had been sprung, and Loki knew he was staring at the next deadly move in Black Caesar's game. Ethan's agents, known in the underworld as the Snakeheads, had spent the better part of the night searching this abandoned warehouse for Loki. At last, a single pair of footsteps rang out from a shadowy alcove. A lone figure emerged, dressed head to toe in black. His mask was featureless, save for two dark visors that concealed everything beneath. "I hear you've been looking for me," the stranger said, his voice measured and eerily calm. Every snakehead froze. Recognition spread like wildfire. "That's Black Caesar," someone whispered. A stunned hush fell over the room. Black Caesar was the world's most notorious terrorist leader, the architect of the Superpowered Assault Academy, whose attacks had cost thousands of lives. Compared to him, every other extremist was a mere footnote. He lifted a gloved hand in dismissal. "But you're insignificant, far too weak to interest me. If we ever fought, it would end before it even began." Loki stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. A cruel smirk spread across his face. "We'll see about that," he snarled. "My mind scepter will break you, and mark my words, when we meet, you won't just back down, you'll kneel." Unfazed, Black Caesar reached inside his coat and withdrew a small sealed package. With a swift toss, he sent it arcing toward one of Ethan's lieutenants. "I hear you've hit a few snags," he said coolly. "Consider this a token of good faith." Ethan watched silently from the shadows, his pulse racing. In an instant, everything had changed. The balance of power in this dark world had just shifted, and none of them would ever be the same. Deep beneath the fortress of Hydra, Ethan stood before a long steel table crowded with writhing, ink-black vials. He cleared his throat. "This," he announced, "is Hydra's latest creation, the Monster Cell. It unlocks the dormant potential of any human host. Fail to withstand the transformation, and you die. Survive it, and you'll possess strength on par with a frost giant, at the very least." He let that sink in. "I'm not exaggerating," Ethan continued. "Given the mutation rates we've recorded on this Earth, and the extraordinary adaptability of its people, New York could soon harbor over 3,000 superpowered individuals. And that figure will only rise. Most of those heroes won't be born. They'll be engineered by these monster cells. Think Venom on steroids, only more extreme. Whether these creations can ever return to their original selves depends entirely on the strength of their wills." He paused, eyes sweeping the Hydra commanders assembled before him. "I'm no philanthropist. I won't deliberately set hero against hero, though I do profit from their conflicts. If the champions grow too powerful, I'll tip the scales toward evil. If the villains become too dominant, I'll simply sit back and enjoy the spectacle." At that moment, Loki emerged from the shadows and stepped up to the table. His icy blue eyes flicked across the dark tumors pulsing within their glass chambers. "Monster cells?" he mused, voice smooth as silk. "Who among you is bold enough to consume one?" Though Loki framed it as a question, every Hydra officer felt the unspoken command: refuse, and face dire consequences. The division chiefs exchanged uneasy glances, each weighing the cost of running afoul of a god. Though the 6 remaining Hydra heads fell under Loki's sway through the Mind Scepter, their instinctive cunning proved impossible to erase. At the top of the roster stood the 3 most formidable figures: William Sitwell, Baron Stella, and Baron Zemo. After Alexander Pierce's death, his steadfast lieutenant, William Sitwell, assumed command. Loki may have purged much of Pierce's network, and Captain Marvel confiscated the elite strike team, but the Hydra agents who once served S.H.I.E.L.D. and then defected still packed a potent punch. Then there was Baron Stella, a German hereditary nobleman who had helmed Hydra during its pure era, back when the organization was at the height of its power and united under a single banner. In those years, He collaborated closely with the Führer and even held a seat in the Reichstag, ensuring Hydra's influence ran deep within the Nazi regime. Last among these top three was Baron Helmut Zemo, the 12th head of his storied German lineage. An early and enthusiastic member of the Nazi Party, Zemo quickly became a favorite at Hitler's court. Renowned as much for his charisma as for his scientific genius, he supplied Hydra with some of its deadliest technological innovations. During World War II, Baron Stella nominally led Hydra, but in practice he wielded little real authority. Baron Helmut Zemo, who frequently ignored Stella's orders, was almost as powerful, and, when Hydra fractured, simply declared himself ruler of his own faction. Then there's Viper, better known as Lady Hydra. She entered the organization as a promising recruit and through ruthless maneuvering rose to its upper echelons, though she never quite measured up to Red Skull. After the split, Viper carved out a regional command for herself, functioning much like a district governor. Sir Brock Rumlow, commonly known as Whitehall in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. series, also dates back to Hydra's Wawatu hierarchy. He prolonged his life by transplanting organs taken from a test subject called Shockwave's mother, but even in his heyday, he was overshadowed by Stella, Zemo, and Viper. Following Hydra's collapse, Rumlow's authority was likewise reduced to district-level operations. Finally, Gideon Malik represents the most traditionalist branch of Hydra, yet even he fell victim to Loki's machinations, because whenever Loki discovered any Hydra presence, he struck without mercy. Loki's campaign of chaos didn't stop at Hydra. He launched simultaneous attacks on the Ten Rings, leaving the underworld reeling. Ordinary Ten Rings operatives were no match for Hydra's elite agents, and none of them even had a direct line to someone as high up as the Mandarin. As a result, Loki's influence barely extended beyond a handful of low-level foot soldiers. His so-called snakeheads remained fanatically loyal but refused to risk themselves directly, so they simply sent their own men in their stead. These hand-picked henchmen knew that disobedience wasn't an option. Betrayal never even crossed their minds. They gritted their teeth and accepted the one ultimatum before swallow the cell or face certain death. A hulking figure with a shock of blonde hair stepped forward. His hands shook as he picked up the writhing jelly-like cell. Black Caesar's orders had been brutally clear. Just take it. There's no other way. You'll either die, lose your mind and become a monster, or gain unimaginable power. With a final swallow, the cell disappeared down his throat. Within seconds, his body began to convulse. Muscles ballooned beneath the skin. Jagged bone spurs cracked through in grotesque formations. A roar ripped from his lungs, resonant and triumphant. "Power!" he shouted, eyes gleaming. He laughed then, blood-chilling, exultant. Though he'd once taken on a lizard man's form, this new transformation was leagues beyond it. He could feel raw strength coursing through every vein, far surpassing anything he'd experienced before. As the echo of his laughter died away, the chamber fell silent, save for the pounding of armored flesh against stone. Loki's dark experiment had yielded its first true success. It looks like I only have the one line so far. Could you please provide the rest of the chapter's text? Once I have the full passage, I'll be happy to rewrite it into polished, coherent English, renaming Luther to Ethan and ensuring he's portrayed as a male throughout. Chapter 374, A New Dragon-Level Monster. They swallowed the monster cells without hesitation. One person died in the process, but the rest completed their transformations, except two who lost their sanity and reverted into frenzied beasts. With bone-chilling roars, they lunged at the Hydra's snakeheads and at Loki himself. Black Caesar's prediction had come true. Those two had become exactly the mindless monsters he warned about. Loki maintained a calm exterior, but his heart was racing. What Black Caesar had revealed to him was simply staggering. Although he couldn't quantify these creatures' exact power, he could detect from their ragged breaths that they were vastly stronger than before. Even so, if all they had were these monsters, launching an attack on Wakanda would still be impossible. Once the confidants had consumed their monster cells, the Hydra's snakeheads put each of them to the test, and the results exceeded every expectation. In sheer durability, these new abominations outclassed the lizardmen, who already shrugged off small-caliber rifle fire and regenerated at an astonishing rate. Every one of these monsters, even the weakest, ignored point-blank AK-47 fire as though it passed through mist. Stronger, tougher, and yet unpredictably savage. Loki's brow furrowed. They had acquired a devastating new edge, but they were still far from ready to challenge Wakanda. Ethan stared at the tactical readout and let out a low whistle. This is worse than I thought. To stop them, the U.S. forces would have to open fire with machine guns right in the city. Civilian casualties would be inevitable, and they've already had a few tragic incidents. Loki frowned beside him. Black Caesar seems to have overlooked the real problem, he said. It's not a shortage of troops or firepower. We simply don't have anything capable of piercing Wakanda's vibranium energy shield. Ethan nodded, which is exactly why I chose this moment to deploy the monster cells. He tapped a finger against the table. That, combined with the lizard serum already coursing through our Hydra operatives, guarantees the birth of a dragon-class monster. Across the room, one of the Hydra agents winced, clutching his throat. No one moved to help him. Everyone was watching. After ingesting the monster cells, his mutation was accelerating at a terrifying pace. First, tiny scales erupted across his skin like ripples on a pond. They multiplied until his entire body was encased in glossy jet-black plating. Even more alarmingly, the monster cells had rewritten his lizard gene fragments, triggering an unknown genetic sequence deep within him. Loki exchanged a glance with Ethan. We may have just created something we can't control. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away from the transforming agent. We knew the risks, he replied quietly. Now we see what we really have to face. Ethan convulsed as jagged bone spurs burst through the worn scales along his spine, tearing flesh and drawing blood. He let out a primal roar of agony. Ethan, what's happening to you? Onlookers stared in horror at his transformation. Does it hurt that much? Someone asked, voice trembling. Ethan's backbone writhed and shifted, the bones in his tailbone swelling, extending into the very appendage that should have shriveled away. Within moments, a long, powerful tail unfurled behind him. He shot up to over 3 meters tall, his body stretching to more than 4 meters in total length. Broad and muscular, the tail alone accounted for nearly half his size. His torso bulged with dense, rippling muscles, as though a colossal lizard had merged with a mountain bear. Along his back, sharp, bony spines jutted upward. Despite the brutal metamorphosis, Ethan's mind remained clear. He felt an exhilarating surge of strength flowing through every fiber of his being, stronger than he had ever been. Instinctively, he opened his jaws and unleashed a torrent of blue flame that washed over the nearest creatures in the crowd. Within seconds, several unfortunate bystanders were reduced to cinders. Gasps and shouts rippled through the onlookers. Even the snake chieftains, proud, hissing figures at the front, staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief. Ethan, what are you doing? Silence fell. All stared at the newly born behemoth, uncertain whether to flee or fight. Meanwhile, Ethan stood at the center of their panic, every inch of him bristling with raw power, and a question burning brighter than any flame in his throat. Is he trying to seize the throne? Winkton thought, alarm flaring in his eyes. He barely had time to react before Loki materialized at his side, the psychic scepter in the god's hand burning with an unnerving blue glow. Settle yourself and obey me, Loki said, his voice a cold whisper that carried the weight of absolute command. The blue flame dancing across the scepter made Winkton's skin prickle. He'd never seen power like this. Still, he forced himself to breathe deeply and regain control. Moments ago, he'd lost it, spitting a jet of flame so fierce it could have incinerated an entire battalion. It wasn't a trick or a hidden spell. For Winkton, breathing fire was as natural as drawing breath, and now he realized its true magnitude. The fire had been more potent, more consuming than anything he'd ever unleashed. Nearby, Ethan, formerly known as Luther, watched with wide-eyed fascination and mounting dread. He had experimented with the lizard serum, hoping to engineer a dragon-tier creature, but never had he imagined creating something so terrifyingly akin to Godzilla. The monster's hide shimmered with regenerative energy, almost G-cell-like in its rapid healing, while its thunderous footsteps cracked the marble courtyard. Ethan clenched his fists. With a beast like this at their command, they could break through Wakanda's defenses as easily as snapping a twig. Far to the east, in the heart of Wakanda, the Royal War Council assembled. King T'Challa stood at the head of the massive table, flanked by Dora Milaje and Vibranium Division commanders. Holographic projections of Loki, Ultron, and now this colossal reptilian terror hovered over the table's surface. "How do we counter an enemy that commands sorcery, robotics, and monsters?" whispered Okoye, her spear tapping the mahogany. "We adapt," T'Challa replied, eyes never leaving the flickering images. "Wakanda has faced gods and machines before. We will face monsters as well." As war drums echoed through the hidden city, Ethan and Winkton prepared to unleash their creation. Outside the palace gates, the ground trembled with each roar, promising a confrontation that would test even Wakanda's legendary might. Wakanda's intelligence network, spies planted in key capitals around the globe, has finally confirmed the identities behind the rumors. Loki is active again, Ultron has rebuilt his robot armies, and Hydra's schemes are more sinister than ever. Even whispers of an Asgardian Protoss threat have reached Wakandan ears. All of it has given King T'Chaka a serious headache. He'd hoped to pass the torch of global diplomacy to his son, Prince T'Challa, and seal Wakanda's borders once and for all. But the world is changing at a staggering pace, and the old king can feel himself falling behind. Though Wakanda has long monitored alien incursions, it has refused to intervene, choosing instead to remain neutral. That stance infuriates T'Challa. He argues that by sitting on the sidelines, Wakanda risks alienating the very nations it hopes to court. After all, who respects a kingdom that refused to help resist an invasion? T'Challa isn't alone in his frustration. The revelation that Emperor Ethan, once believed to be mere legend, has not only mastered technology far beyond even Wakanda's advanced sciences, but has actually left Earth altogether, has sent shockwaves through the royal court. For decades, Wakandans prided themselves on being the world's most technologically sophisticated nation. Now, their supremacy is in question, and both father and son must decide how and whether to step onto the world stage again. Yet in just a few short years, a prodigy has arisen who outstrips the combined achievements of countless predecessors. T'Challa stepped forward to his father, urgency in his tone. "Father, we can no longer withstand endless attacks from Hydra and Ultron. It's time we reached out to the Illuminati." After the alien invasion, Tony Stark, lonely and craving allies, publicly acknowledged the existence of the Illuminati and even listed Emperor Ethan among its members. His reasoning was simple: assemble the world's greatest minds under one banner. To accommodate the threat posed by the Saiyans, Stark organized the Illuminati into tiers. Only a select few, those possessing unparalleled intellect and power, serve as first-degree members. Below them are second- and third-degree ranks, a broader pool recruited as compromises to bolster the alliance. Recognizing an opening, T'Challa saw that Wakanda's moment had come. With Tony Stark's priorities no longer perfectly aligned with the United States, Wakanda could join the Illuminati and, through Stark's global network, secure new allies and resources for the kingdom. Chapter 375, America is in Trouble. "T'Challa, I told you, we'll discuss this after you've become king," King T'Chaka said, his tone brooking no argument. Before T'Challa could respond, a deafening boom rolled through the palace. Courtiers froze in place as dust rattled overhead. Without a second thought, T'Challa sprinted outside, leaping down the steps toward the source of the blast. Before him, the great vibranium energy barrier shimmered under a relentless assault of dark blue power. Waves of crackling radiation pulsed outward, casting an eerie glow across the plains of Wakanda. Even at a distance, the air felt heavy with dread. Princess Surui's voice crackled through T'Challa's communicator. "Your Highness, the barrier won't last long. This energy, it's beyond anything we've ever recorded, stronger than a hydrogen bomb." They all knew vibranium shields weren't made purely of metal. They were fields of energy generated by vibranium's unique properties. But nobody had ever dared test the shield against a true hydrogen blast. Until now, they could only speculate about the outcome. And now, with the barrier trembling on the verge of collapse, the answer had come, and it was far more terrifying than they had ever imagined. Princess Shuri's warning made both T'Challa and King T'Chaka's skin crawl. "Once the barrier falls, the energy release alone could obliterate most of Wakanda," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "Hydra has weapons like that?" T'Chaka whispered, disbelief in every syllable. If only Black Caesar's forces can trigger such devastation, imagine the rest of Hydra's arsenal. Shuri shook her head. The world still mixes up Black Caesar's Hydra with Loki's Hydra. They think it's one and the same. We should be grateful their boss didn't show up in person. I've seen footage of Black Caesar in battle. We wouldn't last a minute. Everyone, fall back, Shuri ordered. As Chala exchanged a quick nod with his father, he sprinted for the lab to suit up in his Black Panther armor. But before Chaka could issue a full retreat, the barrier exploded in a deafening roar. In an instant, Wakanda's energy shield dissipated. Screens across the capital blinked to black. Excellent work, Winston, Loki purred over the comm. From his position behind the enemy lines, he watched Wakanda's defenses collapse. Now seize every ounce of vibranium. This place will be my new stronghold, safe from Tony and his allies. Loki's laughter echoed through the silent command center, exultant at the surprise Winston's breach had delivered. Wakanda was at his mercy. Ethan had never fully tested the limits of his flame breath until now. Calling upon every ounce of strength, he unleashed a torrent of fire so fierce that the air itself seemed to burn. He stared in awe at the destruction, the ground seared to glass, stone fragmented into shards. Beside him stood his new subordinate, a warrior whose raw power rivaled even Thor's. With an ally like that, Ethan finally felt they might stand a chance. Thousands of miles away, within the Illuminati's high-tech command center, Tony Stark monitored the global energy grid. His recently upgraded sensors, designed to track the elusive Black Caesar, had just registered a massive detonation over Wakanda. Impossible to ignore. "Team," Tony called out, tapping at a floating holo display, "we've got an energy signature off the charts. It matches what we'd expect from Black Caesar. Who's available to investigate?" Without hesitation, Carol Danvers spoke up. "I'll take it. I've been waiting for a chance to face him." Moments later, Captain Marvel rocketed into the sky. Even battling atmospheric drag, she pushed dozens of times the speed of sound, more than enough to appear above Wakanda in an instant. Ethan's scanners immediately locked onto Loki and Winkton the moment the cloaking barrier dissolved, revealing the hidden metropolis below. As the shimmering force field collapsed, the true face of Wakanda unfolded beneath him. He tapped his comms. "Are you sure these coordinates are right? This is supposed to be Africa." Ethan had no prejudice about any region or people, but nothing in his extensive briefings or in human history suggested that such a high-tech civilization could exist here. He frowned at the display. "Explain this to me." On the other end of the link, Tony Stark ran a rapid diagnostic sweep. "Wakanda's tech is off the charts," he said, voice tinged with awe. "These buildings, that energy network, there's no way this is human level. I'm betting this is an alien installation." Ethan switched to video feed. Instantly, Tony's lab monitors lit up with sweeping views of gleaming towers, hover vehicles darting through the air, and the unmistakable hum of vibranium-powered machinery. Stark's jaw dropped. "Even my most generous estimates can't match this," he admitted. "If it isn't extraterrestrial, they're the most advanced civilization ever to exist on Earth." Hovering above the secret city, Ethan felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. "So you really believe aliens have been hiding here in Africa all along?" he asked. Tony ran a hand through his hair. "Either that, or we've completely underestimated what humans can achieve when they keep their breakthroughs under strict lock and key." Ethan exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the shining skyline of Wakanda. Whatever the truth, it was clear their next move would change everything. Tony Stark's eyes blazed with purpose as the alert came through. "Illuminati, assemble!" At once, he reached out to the gifted operatives who had only recently joined the Illuminati, including Ethan. This was no routine mission. They were about to confront an alien civilization that had been covertly living on Earth for who knows how long. Stark's plan was unfolding on a global scale, and he even pulled in Nick Fury, now returned to the field after months in the shadows. Fury, the battle-hardened former director of S.H.I.E.L.D., had barely survived the fallout when Hydra's secret takeover was exposed. Fury had been on the verge of death until Captain Marvel's timely return forced the powers that be to leave him in peace. Their alliance and America's dire need for every ally made his involvement essential. The United States was still reeling. Saiyan attacks had devastated entire cities and even stretches of coastline around Los Angeles, and reconstruction was painfully slow. With the government's budget strained and private investors loath to pour money into rebuilding what they saw as someone else's problem, progress had stalled. Tony had even proposed creating a post-disaster reconstruction bureau, but he was already juggling too many high-priority projects. Cutting-edge research on Saiyan physiology, intelligence gathering on alien enclaves, and now, preparation for this all-out strike force. As the Illuminati members logged in, each brought unique skills, arcane knowledge, advanced technology, unparalleled strategic minds. And standing among them was Ethan, his resolve hardening at the thought of finally facing the hidden invaders. Together, they would confront whatever ancient power had been lurking in humanity's shadow and decide the fate of the world. The mounting pressure was already triggering Tony's anxiety, leaving him feeling smothered. When Nick Fury received Tony's urgent report, he took it just as seriously. S.H.I.E.L.D. was gone, and though Carol had saved his life, Fury had been barred from ever handling electronic devices again, and every major intelligence agency would now watch him like a hawk. But Fury still had one ace up his sleeve, the Skrulls. Through their covert network, he passed along Tony's intelligence, complete, accurate, and delivered via an untraceable channel. Fury knew exactly why Tony had reached out, and he made sure the data reached every relevant party securely. No one else could serve as a go-between, not even Tony himself. The response was immediate. All sides recognized the stark reality. The United States could no longer send in troops. Its army lay crippled, and the Navy had lost an entire fleet. The message from Washington was "Blull, we either fall together or you step in." With their forces shattered, America had no choice but to stand down. "I'd be happy to help, but I'll need the actual chapter text you'd like revised. Could you please paste the full excerpt of the machine-translated fanfiction here? Once I have it, I'll transform it into a smooth, idiomatic English version, renaming Luther to Ethan and making sure he's clearly male." Chapter 3376, Hydra vs. Wakanda. High above the battlefield, Captain Marvel hovered silently, her eyes locked on a lone figure below, Winston, the only man who'd ever managed to make her hesitate. Neither the Wakandan forces nor the Hydra legions had noticed her arrival. They were too absorbed in their own deadly standoff. Ultron, true to form, refused to lead from the front. Instead, he unleashed his robot armies, sending wave after wave of mechanized soldiers crashing into the Wakandan lines. But these were no ordinary Ultron drones. In Hydra's clandestine laboratories, each unit had been gutted and rebuilt around experimental energy weapon systems first developed during World War II. And those designs owed everything to Red Skull's old research into harnessing space stone energy. In truth, even before Hydra acquired the Cosmic Cube, its wartime technology had already eclipsed that of any other nation. Their generators produced power levels unheard of in the 1940s, unstable perhaps, but fearsomely potent. Their metallurgy breakthroughs yielded alloys far stronger than anything the Allies or the Axis could muster. Their energy storage and transmission systems were decades ahead of their time. And every one of their heavy weapons and armored vehicles bore the unmistakable influence of Nazi Germany's wildest wonder weapon fantasies, reimagined and perfected by Hydra engineers. Take the colossal super-heavy tank rolling toward Wakandan defenses. Its bulk and form were lifted nearly intact from scrapped German schematics, but where the original designs had called for diesel engines and belt-driven gears, Hydra had inserted a crackling energy cannon capable of slicing through even vibranium plating. Behind it rumbled trucks armed with Red Skull's enhanced pulse rifles, while hovering gunships bristled with prototype energy turrets. As the Wakandan battle lines buckled under the mechanical onslaught, Captain Marvel tightened her jaw. This was no mere clash of armies. This was a reckless resurrection of the past, unleashed with cosmic power. And if she didn't act soon, Winston and his Hydra masters would turn Wakanda into their newest proving ground, and the rest of the world into their next victim. Chapter 8, Hydra's Microtank. Ethan stepped onto the dusty platform and squinted at the imposing silhouette before him, a brand-new Hydra Microtank. Its main weapon was a massive hull-mounted mortar with no rotating turret. Elevation and depression were the only means of aiming. To swing the gun left or right, the entire vehicle had to reposition. Cumbersome as it was, the mortar's raw firepower was breathtaking. Its barrel mouth was wide enough to fit a man, and a single shell could reduce reinforced concrete fortifications to rubble. Knowing the mortar's fixed-arc limitations, the engineers fitted two secondary cannons. One sat on a swiveling mount beneath the main gun housing. The other was tucked at the front end of each side skirt, technically at the upper rear edge of the hull's flank. The under-turret weapon boasted about 180 degrees of traverse, covering the blind spots the mortar couldn't reach. Officially designated the Hydra micro-tank, this vehicle offered a balance of mobility and protection that its giant tank brethren lacked. Simpler to build and easier to maintain, micro-tanks could be mass-produced to meet the Vanguard Army's urgent needs. Their signature armament was the Grendel 900 heavy energy cannon, powered by a compact space gem reactor. Each charged shot unleashed a searing energy pulse capable of tearing through any conventional Earth-based defenses. Beneath the armor lay a hybrid chassis, the reconnaissance agility of a World War II lighter Panzerspähwagen fused with the rugged undercarriage of a JCB engineering crawler. The result was surprising off-road speed and stability, allowing the microtank to navigate urban rubble and forested terrain alike. But the microtank was only one element of Hydra's next-generation arsenal. After Dr. Kessler's latest breakthroughs, 3 more systems were ready for field trials. Hydra Energy Gun, a shoulder-fired directed energy weapon that channels space gem energy into pinpoint blasts. Hydra Motorcycle, a streamlined reconnaissance bike bristling with sensors and stealth ECM modules designed for hit-and-run scouting. Heavy Armor Hydra Soldier, a powered exosuit combining ballistic plating with enhanced strength servos, communications arrays, and integrated HUD. Ethan closed his briefing dossier. With these assets, micro-tanks, energy weapons, recon motorcycles, and armored troops, Hydra's new doctrine of rapid, overwhelming force was poised to rewrite the rules of engagement. He strode toward the command tent, ready to coordinate the first live exercise. In the hushed glow of the Hydra Research Lab, Ethan watched Zola's final adjustments with rapt attention. At long last, she had succeeded in drawing the raw power of the space gem from the cosmic cube, and more importantly, she'd figured out how to stabilize that energy and seal it into a compact, magazine-like canister. The implications were staggering. With this single breakthrough, Hydra had vaulted far beyond conventional weaponry, developing portable energy arms that eclipsed technology from multiple eras past. Infantrymen could now carry anti-armor firepower in the palm of their hand, an almost unstoppable force when aimed at hardened targets. Of course, the new energy rifles weren't flawless. Their power cells allowed for rapid bursts, but true sustained fire still lagged behind that of a standard automatic weapon. To cover that gap, Hydra troopers were issued the Zolanator 2000X assault rifle alongside their energy guns, ensuring every squad had both punch and volume of fire. And then there was the heavy armored soldier concept. Ethan stepped back to let a platoon of these new troopers march by, each clad in reinforced exosuits designed to withstand incoming rounds while carrying the bulkier energy magazines. It was Hydra's vision of the ultimate single-soldier system: lethal firepower, enhanced protection, and the mobility to strike anywhere on the battlefield. Ethan allowed himself a grim smile. With this combination of conventional and energy weaponry, mastered by Zola's genius, Hydra's forces were about to become an unstoppable harvest, and he knew he'd be right at the center of it all. Ethan stood before the holoscreen, studying the latest combat gear Hydra had rolled out. According to the specs, the new powered suit's layered hard shell makes its wearer virtually impervious to small and medium-caliber gunfire. In fact, on first contact, even Captain America's thrown shield can't punch clean through in a single strike. But every design has its flaw. Here, it's the rear-mounted energy block, a powerful but exposed reservoir that, if struck or overloaded, detonates outward and cripples the entire system. Mounted to each forearm is a versatile weapons module. A quick pull on an internal ring switches it between an energy cannon and a flamethrower. Combined with the suit's nearly impenetrable defense, this gives soldiers the confidence to hold their ground and pour out sustained fire, easily cutting down conventional infantry. Ethan tapped the display again, pulling up Hydra's latest battlefield innovation, the Chitauri H3LA energy rifle. After scavenging wreckage from fallen Chitauri soldiers, Hydra's engineers reverse-engineered the alien power cores and magnetic bolt accelerators. They grafted these components onto standard Earth-style barrels, magazines, and grips, producing a hybrid weapon that looks like a rifle but fires stabilized energy bolts. Now in limited mass production, the H3LA blends familiar human ergonomics with terrifying extraterrestrial firepower. Ethan studied the schematics carefully. By all indications, the exoskeleton's output barely matches that of a standard Chitauri infantry rifle. In the film footage, the only hybrid weapons we actually see are individual designs based on AR-style assault rifles. Yet the official database also lists variants modeled on AUX and M2, 49 paratrooper machine guns. In true Hollywood fashion, all these transforming firearms share the same sleek tactical look, very much like the Nest Force weapons featured in the live-action Transformers movies. What truly set Hydra's design apart, however, was the Chitauri exoskeleton armor itself. Developed in Hydra's top-secret labs, it combined cutting-edge materials research with advanced energy system integration to give Chitauri soldiers several game-changing capabilities. 1. Low-altitude flight. Compact repulsors built into the back and boots allowed brief, controlled hover and rapid descent. 2. Directional energy projection. The gauntlets double as hybrid firearms, channeling stored power to fire concentrated energy arrows at medium range. 3. Enhanced close quarters force. When striking hand-to-hand, the armored fists can discharge a short-range blast of energy, significantly amplifying impact. Aesthetically, the armor bore a stark polar paint scheme, icy whites and grays slashed with black accents, that contrasted sharply against Hydra's usual red and black branding. Control of the suit relied on a neural interface system. Electrodes embedded in the helmet's lining synced with the wearer's brainwaves, translating thought into instant mechanical response. The helmet itself featured an ergonomically hinged eyepiece, a full-color heads-up display, and a built-in encrypted comlink for battlefield coordination. As Ethan reviewed each page of the report, he realized how dangerous this armor could be if mass-produced. It wasn't just power that Hydra had perfected, it was the speed at which they could deploy it in the field. And if they ever managed to equip an entire wave of Chitauri soldiers with these suits, Earth's defenses might not stand a chance. Ethan cinched the straps of his backpack, feeling the hum of its Chitauri energy core pulse against his back. He tapped his boot, activating the adjustable magnetic generator housed in the sole. High above the war zone, he took a deep breath and peered down. Below him, Hydra's imitation super soldier detachment streamed onto the field. Born of a Cold War-era secret project, these warriors were the product of reversed-engineered super soldier serum stolen from Howard Stark. Years ago, Baron Zemo had systematically eliminated the original test subjects in their hibernation chambers, and now, under Loki's worldwide dominion, Hydra had restarted mass production. With lizard serum and wolf serum stocks running scarce, the results were uneven. But even so, the field teemed with these augmented troops, their eyes glowing with unnatural vigor. Opposing them were the defenders of Wakanda, armed with gleaming vibranium spears. Each weapon could unleash concentrated laser bursts powerful enough to punch through reinforced steel. Their suits, though appearing sleek and lightweight, were woven from vibranium fibers so resilient that they shrugged off full-power AK-47 rounds as if they were mere rain droplets. From his vantage point, Ethan watched Wakandan lines hold steady against wave after wave of Hydra's super soldiers. The air shook with the thunderous roar of advanced artillery and the crackle of energy blasts. Every time a Hydra soldier lunged forward, a lance of vibranium fire met them mid-charge, halting them in a blaze of blue-white light. At his side, Captain Marvel hovered, her expression tense. She allowed herself a single, long look at the chaotic vista below before setting her jaw. "They've grown stronger since the last time," she murmured, eyes narrowing. "We'll need more than firepower to break their ranks." Ethan nodded, adjusting his own energy core's output. "Then let's give them something new to fear." Together, they plunged toward the fray, ready to tip the balance in a conflict born of stolen science and redefine it with hope. Wherever the Hydra troopers' energy rifles struck, total annihilation followed. Even vibranium offered no defense. Yet when the Wakandan warriors hurled their vibranium-tipped spears, swaths of high-energy plasma blades cut straight through Hydra armor. Tanks and armored exoskeletons shattered as if made of paper. The thickest hulls buckled in an instant under those spearheads. "Sir, the rules have changed," one officer shouted, his voice cracking. "No," countered his commander, voice flat. "We're just waking up to reality." Ethan couldn't tear his eyes away from the battlefield. A fresh salvo of spears ripped through a Chitauri dreadnought, gouging its hull and sending sparks flying. Apart from Hydra's own weapons, the alien energy rifles were useless against Wakanda's defenses. Soldiers struck by the spears staggered back only briefly, then charged forward again, undaunted. These Wakandans were in a class of their own. Chapter 377, Thor, Sparks, and Lightning. Hydra's armored columns rolled over the horizon, energy cannons blazing bright in the morning light. Across the field, Wakandan warriors rose to meet them, their vibranium shields shimmering as pulses of blue and purple crackled through the air. Neither side showed mercy. This was the first time Wakanda had faced an incursion of such scale and ferocity. Watching from a nearby ridge, Captain Marvel hovered silently. Tony Stark had explicitly ordered her to stand down. He and the rest of the Avengers believed this clash would flush out Black Caesar's agents, and they were determined not to let him slip through their fingers again. Despite her impatience, Carol Danvers trusted Tony's plan. She even felt certain she could handle Black Caesar herself if it came to that, though she wasn't quite sure where her confidence sprang from. Perhaps it was the same strange energy she'd sensed from Ethan's transformation. She couldn't deny feeling stronger since that incident. On the battlefield below, Hydra's tanks advanced behind lines of infantry armed with modified energy blasters. Yet they were only half the threat. From hidden factories around the globe, Ultron's reconfigured legions marched in perfect formation. Hundreds of thousands of robots now sported integrated weaponry. Their left arms had been rebuilt into high-output energy cannons, their right arms repurposed Chitauri infantry blasters, and at the center of each chassis glowed a miniaturized arc reactor. With a mobile nuclear deterrent built into every torso and a lethal self-destruct protocol primed, Ultron's army posed a terrifying multiplier to Hydra's already formidable technology. Still, the open plain between the two forces was destined to become a crucible for Wakandan resolve. As the first shells struck and energy beams carved holes in the ground, Captain Marvel drew a steady breath. Intervention was off the table. Yet she would not stand idly by if Ethan or any innocent soul were caught in the crossfire. The storm was coming, and when lightning fell, they would need every spark of courage to survive. Ultron's ultimate weapon lay hidden in plain sight. Every one of his sentry robots carried a self-destruct device capable of unleashing an energy blast on par with the Saiyan strike that once obliterated Los Angeles. In the films, this fail-safe never actually goes off. Screenwriters constrained Ultron's intellect, but in reality, if he could secure enough vibranium, his mechanical legions would hold the planet hostage to a single catastrophic doomsday pulse. Blinded by his own superior logic, Ultron dismissed any talk of a returning Saiyan threat. He assumed that problem long since solved. He didn't even take Loki and his band of Asgardian pirates seriously. Now, with ruthless efficiency, Ultron's drones swarm every vibranium cache they can find, tearing through vaults and disabling defenses in seconds. Each cache they capture brings him one step closer to global annihilation. But Ultron isn't the only force descending on Wakanda. Hydra operatives have infiltrated the kingdom's borders, unleashing wave after wave of monstrous troops, lizard folk, werewolves, vampires, mutant rhinos, and crocodiles, even grotesque new hybrids bred for sheer terror. When T'Challa leapt into battle in his Black Panther armor, hope flickered briefly, until he realized he hadn't consumed the heart-shaped herb. Without its ancestral enhancements, his strength and reflexes were no match for Hydra's engineered beasts, and he was felled in moments. Even King T'Chaka, once a peerless warrior after ingesting the heart-shaped herb, has grown soft behind palace walls. Shielded by generations of tradition and privilege, he's no longer the combatant he once was. As Hydra's abominations tore through Wakanda's outer defenses and Ultron's automatons trampled every last resistance, it became clear. Only by reclaiming the sacred herb's power and uniting against both Hydra's nightmares and Ultron's apocalypse could Wakanda hope to survive the coming storm. Ethan's port, Abel's spectrometer, chimed insistently. Every blade of grass here was laced with vibranium isotopes. Following its protocols, the device instantly began siphoning off soil and vegetation samples into sealed containment pods. He barely had time to marvel at the readings when the ground behind him trembled. From the shimmering blue haze, colossal rhinos charged into view, horns gleaming like polished metal. Ethan barely managed to deploy his energy cannons before the beasts swept past, utterly unfazed by the blasts. He stared in disbelief. These weren't ordinary animals. They were living vibranium constructs. Vibranium, as he well knew, is a singularly unique metal, one that fuses harmlessly with living tissue without inducing heavy metal poisoning. Looking out over the vast plain, Ethan understood why Wakanda's very soil pulsed with this wonder material. The entire nation sits atop an unimaginable vibranium meteorite, so vast that centuries of extraction haven't yielded a single % of its total mass. Even more alarming, the meteorite still radiates a transmuting energy, gradually converting neighboring rock, water, plant, and animal life into new deposits of vibranium. That's why the local grass grows in uncanny heart shapes, and why these hybrid creatures roam the fields. Yet puzzlingly, the Wakandan people themselves show no sign of vibranium infusion, despite drinking from waters thick with its atoms. Ethan frowned. Unlocking that mystery would be his next and most dangerous task. Ultron's plan is bold. Rip every last ounce of vibranium from Wakanda in one sweeping strike, to uproot the nation itself. But Wakanda is ready. The moment the Saiyans arrived, Princess Shuri activated her newest defense, a gargantuan energy cannon engineered specifically to counter ki-based attackers. With an ear-splitting blast, the cannon fired a car-sized sphere of raw power straight into Hydra's ranks. The impact was instantaneous. Everything in its path was obliterated in a blinding explosion. Through the dust and debris, the Saiyan warrior Wielding rose without a word. He drew ki into his throat and unleashed a relentless jet of energy back at the cannon. Boom, 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 boom. The strike was impossibly fast. In the world of One Punch Man, energy-type combatants often require no wind-up. Wielding's output rivaled Boros's famed collapsed star roaring cannon, which can fire in a single breath. Shuri barely had time to prepare a second shot before Wielding's barrage tore her cannon to shreds. Shuri realized her mistake the instant metal and circuitry rained down around her. Wielding's ki flared unchecked, and with nothing left standing between him and Wakanda, the true danger of his power became alarmingly clear. Roar! Wielding threw back his massive head, the deep blue flame in his throat blossoming into a swirling, prismatic torrent of energy. Wherever it swept, matter and antimatter collided in a cataclysmic blast, boom after thunderous boom shaking the very ground. The defenders of Wakanda fell in droves beneath the inferno. "Excellent, Wielding," Loki crowed, straddling the beast's broad skull. In that triumphant moment, he truly believed he'd attained the apex of his power. "Loki!" The roar of his brother's name cut through the chaos. Loki's grin snapped away. His legs buckled, and he pitched forward, clattering from Wielding's head to the stone floor below. From the storm-lashed sky came Thor, god of thunder, trailing sparks of lightning and halos of hellfire. He landed between his brother and the rampaging beast, armor crackling, eyes ablaze with righteous fury. Raising the hammer of gravity, he stepped forward, every sinew coiled for the strike. Odin had long ago seized the flawed hammer that Ethan had replicated through transformation magic. Detecting subtle imperfections, the All-Father himself had journeyed to Nidavellir and commissioned the dwarves to reforge it. Their work didn't alter its divine enchantments, it simply raised the weapon's power ceiling far beyond its previous limits. Now, Thor hurled that newly forged hammer directly at Loki, its heavy form whistling through the air like justice made manifest. In theory, if Thor were strong enough, he could use his gravitational hammer to warp the gravity of the entire solar system, ripping everything apart, atom by atom, and then rearranging it at will. But for now, the gravitational hammer is simply an extraordinarily lethal weapon in Thor's arsenal, far more devastating than Mjolnir. After all, Mjolnir is fabled to carry the mass of a dead star's core, yet countless heroes, the Hulk included, have caught it in midair, or shrugged off direct hits. If it truly weighed that much, even the Hulk would have been obliterated the first time it struck him. What sets the gravitational hammer apart is the way it manipulates gravity and magnetism, concentrating them into an impact force equivalent to millions of tons. Loki, pale with dread, knows only too well that a single blow could end him. Still, Thor is certain that the Loki before him is nothing but an illusion. His real brother could never manifest in such a feeble guise. To compel the true Loki to reveal himself, Thor must unleash a spectacle of raw, unrestrained power. He swings the hammer in a wide arc, and before anyone can react, Wielding receives the full brunt of that gravitational force. The moment the hammer makes contact, a deafening thunderclap echoes through the battlefield. Wielding has no time to brace himself. Millions of tons of concentrated gravity crush him where he stands. Only then does he understand the hammer's terrible might, too late to save himself from its relentless force. Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like rewritten? Once I have the complete passage, I'll be happy to revise it into a polished, idiomatic English version with Ethan as the protagonist. Chapter 378. The Illuminati and Hydra Unite. Ethan pressed himself against a shattered pillar, adrenaline surging as he took in the unlikely alliance unfolding before him. The emerald banners of the Illuminati fluttered side by side with Hydra's black standard, two secretive powers now marching under a single cause. Across the ruined courtyard, Loki stepped forward, flanked by the colossal dragon-level creature known as Wielding. No sooner had Loki struck his boastful pose than Thor unleashed a deafening shockwave. The force flattened the ground and sent Loki staggering backward. Except it wasn't the real god of mischief who staggered, but a shimmering silver projection. Ethan recognized the trick instantly. Loki's true form must be concealed somewhere in the shadows. "Damn you, Thor," Loki snarled, his voice crackling through some hidden transmitter as he watched Wielding slam into the far wall. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if the dragon-level monster might be down for the count. The earth cracked under the blow, debris flying in all directions. But Wielding, scales smoking, shook itself free and rose to its full height, utterly unbowed. Dragon-level beings were notoriously tough. True, oddballs like Slender Beansprout and the Wandering Emperor defied all norms, but even they paled in comparison to the raw resilience of their peers. Slender Beansprout had survived Saitama's full-powered punch, splitting into two, yet refusing to collapse entirely, and countless other dragon-level fiends had been reduced to ashes in a single strike. Wielding's recovery was simply the nature of its kind. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as the dragon charged back across the battlefield. Thor, his hammer, now fully charged with gravitational energy, poised for another swing, met the creature's advance with a fierce grin. "You want another taste?" Thor roared, lifting the gravity hammer. The ground trembled in anticipation of the next clash. Ethan's sudden return caught Thor completely off guard, and then delighted him. The Thunder God had been starving for a real challenge ever since the Saiyan battle. Thor reveled in every clash of hammer and thunder, but he still smarted from that fight. He hadn't been the decisive force, and the Saiyans had pinned him flat on his back. The memory of being ground into the ground by those demi-human warriors still rankled. With the Saiyans now securely imprisoned, Thor had only two reliable sparring partners, Captain Marvel and the Hulk. He could overpower the Hulk, now enhanced beyond his former strength, by channeling divine power and hellfire through his twin hammers, but Captain Marvel remained untouchable. Marvel's raw strength and speed outclassed even Thor's divine might. Thor could unleash thunderbolts and flames, and Marvel would shrug them off and strike back harder. Thor's sister tortured him mercilessly in training, but he still hadn't broken through to the next level. So when he heard that Ethan might fell him with a single blow, Thor's blood sang with excitement. Ethan wasn't an amateur. He'd been an experienced Hydra agent before whatever twisted transformation he'd undergone. In the weeks since his resurrection, Ethan had adapted remarkably to his new body. By all accounts, his capabilities now rivaled the gods themselves. For Thor, there was no better opportunity to test his own limits. Although Wielding's body couldn't move faster than the speed of sound, the tip of his tail could swing at Mach 10. Combined with the ultra-high force plasma discharges from his dorsal spines, he could unleash plasma-cutting blasts. His wings, unlike a reptile's, didn't impede his ability to fight like a human combatant. By now, the dent in his face had already healed. Thor, unaware of Winkton's regenerative abilities, assumed his hammer blows had done no damage, and he grew all the more exhilarated. Captain Marvel watched, frowning in surprise. Hydra has a creature like this? He'd always believed himself far superior to anything Hydra could deploy, yet here was Winkton, a so-called foot soldier, possessing power on par with the world's greatest heroes. It made him wonder, if this was Hydra's baseline, how terrifying must Black Caesar be? Worse still, these other monstrosities hadn't been slowed even by Thor's assault. They'd simply continued their brutal massacre in Wakanda. These ghost-level beasts wielded city-sized deterrence and destructive force. Just look at the devastation caused by the Beast King or the Deep Sea King. And now, Hydra had added Winkton to the roster. Though neither of these weapons was specifically designed to punch holes through defenses, their destructive force was unmatched. Coupled with the onslaught of tiger-level and wolf-level beasts, Wakanda's armies simply couldn't hold them back. In the end, Ethan had no choice but to abandon the capital. Alongside his father, King Robert, and his sister, Princess Sophia, he boarded a vibranium alloy aircraft and took to the skies. But even the plane's nearly indestructible hull couldn't guarantee their escape. Ultron's forces, joined by Hydra operatives, pursued them relentlessly. Explosions rocked the fuselage. "Look at this, Ethan." King Robert spat through clenched teeth as another blast shook the cabin. "This is the outside world's madness. They'd slaughter us just to get our vibranium." "Father, it isn't the world's armies out there," Ethan replied, voice tight with frustration. "It's Hydra, an extremist cell, hunted by every government. They're terrorists, not the entire planet." Their heated exchange was cut short when the jet lurched violently, losing altitude. In an instant, a streak of light tore through the sky, and there, standing atop the plane's roof, was Captain Marvel. She hovered effortlessly, her eyes blazing with resolve. Ethan's heart sank. No stealth system in Wakanda's arsenal could conceal their presence from her cosmic senses. "Going somewhere?" she called, her voice carrying over the roar of the engines. Ethan gripped the armrest, determination hardening in his chest. This was far from over. "Get down!" Captain Marvel's kick sent the vibranium aircraft crashing to the ground. "No, wait! They're with the Illuminati!" Princess Surui's breath caught in her throat as the ship trembled. She and the others stared in stunned silence at the dented hull overhead, then at the unmistakable gleam of vibranium. Captain Marvel wrenched her fist free. She hadn't expected the armor plating to be this resilient. Each blow barely left a scratch. Undeterred, she punched again and again, battering the surface until it finally gave way. Gasping, she studied the shredded metal with wide eyes. What level of technology could yield a material strong enough to shrug off her strikes? If the Kree fleet had been equipped like this when she collided with it, she'd surely have ended up with a huge bump on her forehead. And yet, the Kree Empire, one of the galaxy's three great powers, was ruled by Ronan the Accuser. Surely their ships weren't second-rate. Realizing such advanced hardware was hidden on Earth sent a chill down her spine. This alien civilization was far more formidable and far scarier than anyone had imagined. Captain Marvel's strike tore through the sky, the shockwaves radiating outward like a thunderclap. Yet as the energy hit the Royal Guard, Wakanda's famed vibranium shields absorbed every tremor, leaving King T'Chaka and his warriors unscathed. Still, in the heat of the moment, T'Chaka misread her intervention as proof that the Illuminati had teamed up with Hydra to seize Wakanda's vibranium for themselves. "They're working together, Hydra and the Illuminati," he barked, weapon raised. Hovering above the tense standoff, Captain Marvel studied the small army before her. Their armor and weapons were unlike anything she'd seen on Earth, or anywhere else in the cosmos. These humans wielded technology rivaling the three greatest interstellar empires. Could they be an alien species hiding in plain sight? Or shapeshifters, masters of disguise? The notion seemed as wild as a goblin piloting a Gundam, yet nothing about Wakanda fit her experience. "Your Majesty, please, there's been a misunderstanding," Prince T'Challa called out, stepping between his father and the Avenger. He lowered his spear in a gesture of peace. We are not allied with Hydra or the Illuminati. Wakanda stands alone, protector of vibranium, not its seller. We only defend our land. Captain Marvel regarded him for a long moment, chest rising and falling as she weighed his words. Finally, she tucked her fists at her sides and offered a cautious nod. "All right," she said, "explain it to me, quickly. Since the world has just endured the American Scion invasion, humanity now trembles at even the hint of alien threats. Until recently, Wakanda had been nothing more than a remote, indigenous kingdom hidden at the margins of global affairs." Chapter 379, a mess, revealing so much advanced technology all at once was bound to raise eyebrows. Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, and the others looked on in astonishment. T'Challa knew exactly whose fault this was, Wakanda's. He steeled himself and stepped forward to explain. "We're not aliens," he stated firmly. "We're from Earth." "Earthlings?" Carol crossed her arms, skepticism in her eyes. "Earthlings with technology like this?" Before T'Challa could answer, Carol launched herself at him, her fist erupting in a crackling burst of energy. In an instant, T'Challa's pupils went wide, and he dove aside just in time. But his father, King T'Chaka, hadn't reacted so swiftly. Carol's blow struck with tremendous force, and T'Chaka was hurled back across the chamber. "No, father!" T'Challa cried, sprinting to his side. He felt a rush of guilt and fear. With the heart-shaped herb bolstering his speed and reflexes, he'd been ready to dodge. Why hadn't his father been able to? And he'd been wearing his panther armor, thick, protective, but not nearly enough to withstand a direct hit like that. If it hadn't been for the herb's vitality boost strengthening his bones and organs, T'Chaka's ribs would have been shattered. Silently, T'Challa knelt beside his fallen father, relief washing over him that the worst injuries were avoided. The hall crackled with tension and confusion, and T'Challa braced himself. There would be plenty of explaining to do. "Ma'am, we really are from Earth," T'Challa said urgently to Captain Marvel, "but our advanced technology comes entirely from vibranium." "Vibranium?" Captain Marvel frowned. She'd never studied materials science, let alone a metal with properties so extraordinary. "I'm not familiar with it." "That's understandable." T'Challa took a breath and gave her the Cliff Notes version. How vibranium's unique energy-absorbing lattice propelled Wakandan science centuries ahead of the rest of the world. Captain Marvel remained skeptical, until Tony's voice crackled through her comlink. "Vibranium?" Tony exclaimed. "I always thought the supply was tiny. Never guessed Wakanda had this much. If we'd had half these reserves back when the Saiyans attacked, we wouldn't have ended up flattened." He sounded half joking, but mostly annoyed that Wakanda had kept its greatest asset under wraps. Conveniently, he ignored how his own vibranium nanotech had been neutralized in that same invasion. Captain Marvel shook her head. "Even so, vibranium's too valuable to broadcast. If Wakanda suddenly opened its stash to the world, they'd draw more unwelcome attention than any war-torn oil field." T'Challa gave a rueful smile. He believed Wakanda should share its advances, but he also understood human nature. "Expose vibranium," he warned, "and it'll become the new global black gold. Nations would fight to control it, and Wakanda would be besieged." The United States once coveted the dollar's global dominance thanks to oil. Although that supremacy has since waned, America would undoubtedly move to secure any resource as extraordinary as vibranium. Tony fell silent for a moment. Vibranium truly was more valuable than oil. Despite long being labeled non-renewable, vast new oil fields keep appearing, and some reserves once thought depleted have sprung back to life. Today, oil remains essential for countless chemical products, but in the energy sector, renewables are already phasing out many oil-based industries. Tony understood better than anyone that pairing his groundbreaking energy technology with a material as remarkable as vibranium would upend the entire landscape of human science and engineering. Every theoretical breakthrough has been held back by limitations in materials and energy, and until now there was no way to put those theories into practice. Finally, that barrier was gone. It was just a shame that Wakanda guarded its secrets so fiercely. Tony recognized their caution as natural, yet he couldn't shake the conviction that such secrecy bordered on selfishness. The alien invasion had struck without warning, and for weeks afterward there'd been no word from the invaders, until Hydra's attack blew the lid off their secret. "Cover me," Captain Marvel called. I'll handle Hydra from here. Tony Stark didn't hesitate. From the S-Shield carrier's armory bay, he dispatched a new nanosteel suit to Carol, who rocketed into the fray. On the ground, Hydra's commanders realized with rising dread that Captain Marvel was their single greatest threat. Their most fearsome warrior, Wielding, was already locked in battle with Thor, each staggering blow met by regenerative healing that left them nearly equal. Loki, watching from the shadows, felt panic rise. If Hydra's forces were wiped out now, his dream of ruling Midgard would be lost forever. Captain Marvel, unleashed, was cutting through Hydra's monstrous lizard creatures with a single punch. Only the ghost-tier beasts could hold their own against her, and even they were faltering. With his plans teetering on the brink, Loki bellowed the retreat order. Hydra would live to fight another day, and so would his dark ambitions. Despite his earlier setbacks, Loki was determined to seize control of Thor and Captain Marvel with the Mind Scepter. If it truly channeled even a fraction of the original Mind Gem's power, Thanos had long ago sealed away all but the barest residue. It could still sway its victims. And since the Mind Scepter was manufactured by Ethan, it ought to work flawlessly. Ethan trusted Loki to carry out the deed, but he'd ensured that Black Caesar's own soldiers were immune to its influence, no chance of betrayal there. Loki had argued that the scepter would be most potent at close range, perhaps even pressed against the heart to invade one's psyche directly. Ethan had countered that targeting the head made more sense. After all, thoughts originate in the brain, not the heart. In the end, the Mind Staff in Loki's hand incorporated both of their theories, a precision tool for mental domination. Moments later, Tony Stark sensed that something was terribly wrong. Thor's eyes had gone vacant, his hammer falling from slack fingers. Instead of resuming his duel with Agent Winkleton, the Thunder God pivoted and charged straight at Captain Marvel, bellowing, "Fark!" Tony barely had time to register the change. It could only mean one thing. Loki was at work. Ethan crouched behind a shattered wall, scanning the ruined plaza, but Loki was nowhere to be seen. Worse still, the Illuminati's second and third tier operatives, who had been bravely holding the line against Hydra's monsters, had suddenly broken ranks and charged straight at Captain Marvel as if on a suicide mission. Carol Danvers sensed something was off and refused to kill her allies, but now she was pinned down, her options dwindling. Loki watched from the rooftops with a satisfied smirk. Carol was soaring high overhead, making a direct assault all but impossible. His scheme hinged on two heavy hitters, Thor and a mercenary known only as Wielding. Once they pinned her long enough, he'd strike from above and send her crashing earthward. Just then, the Hulk thundered into view. Bruce Banner had been reluctant to join the fray, especially with Thor under Loki's mind control and the memory of their last disastrous encounter with the Saiyans still fresh in his mind. Tony Stark, equally wary of running headlong into danger, stayed behind, remotely piloting his Iron Man suit. Thanks to Jarvis's airtight safeguards, the armor was immune to Loki's mental tricks. "Remember," Tony barked over the comlink, "anyone under Loki's thrall comes back to their senses if you hit them hard enough. Hulk, go straight for Thor. Knock him flat!" A low, eager roar answered Tony's command as the Green Giant charged off to turn the tide of battle. Chapter 380, Wakanda is Lost. "Hit him hard, Hulk. Thor needs to learn a lesson." Tony's voice crackled over the comlink. Without hesitation, the Green Hulk charged. At the same moment, Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, soared in on a wave of glowing energy. She unleashed a rapid blast of photon fire that sent Thor skidding across the rubble. Closing the distance in a heartbeat, she hooked her fist into his jaw, snapping his head back. Thor roared in pain, but the real assault had only just begun. Hulk reared his massive arms, gripped Mjolnir in both fists, and brought it crashing down onto Thor's lower back with a thunderous crack. The Asgardian's scream echoed across the battlefield as his body folded in two. He hit the hard ground so forcefully that sparks flew wherever his armor scraped the stone. Yet even broken, Thor's will could not be extinguished. Lightning crackled across his prone form, illuminating the twisted wreckage around him. With a guttural bellow, he slammed his hands into the earth and pushed himself upright. Chest heaving, Thor glared at the Hulk. "You dare strike me," he thundered, every word laced with fury. Hulk straightened, planting his feet wide. Tony told me to, he growled, voice heavy with triumph. Pain radiated through Thor's battered body, but he stood unbowed. Around them, the skies rumbled in acknowledgement. The battle was far from over. "Stark!" Thor bellowed, though his anger was laced with helplessness. He knew Loki had him under his thrall. Blaming Tony would get them nowhere. Tony smirked, eyes bright with mischief. "Good to see you back in the fight, Ethan. We need you now more than ever. Loki's got our people mind-controlled. Hit them with everything you've got and jolt them out of it." Thor shot him a dark look, then hefted Mjolnir with a reluctant grunt. Above them, storm clouds swirled and crackled. When the hammer struck the earth, 1,000 lightning bolts arced skyward, sealing off every exit. Even Captain Marvel wasn't spared. She arced through the air, tumbling as the electric surge rocked her. "Wow, stingy with the volts, aren't we?" Carol Danvers called after the lights died, brushing sparks from her uniform. On the ground, Hydra's creatures writhed in smoking convulsions, their bodies smoking where the bolts had struck. The Illuminati fared better, though the shockwave knocked them sideways, and in a moment of mortifying aftermath, a few couldn't quite hold it together. But Hydra paid the steepest price. Wherever the lightning had touched, their forces lay broken and charred, a testament to Ethan's raw electric power unleashed at Thor and Tony's command. Thor's roar echoed across the battlefield. "Loki!" He spun in circles, desperately searching for his younger brother, the very culprit who had outmaneuvered him again. But Loki was nowhere to be found. Only moments ago, Loki had helped Thor regain his senses, then ordered everyone to scatter. Now scattered they were, pinned down by enemy forces, with Captain Marvel determined not to let Wington slip away. Frustrated at not finding Loki, Thor unleashed his fury on Wington instead. Captain Marvel and Thor, two of the mightiest beings on Earth, rained down their combined power. But Wington stood his ground. He planted one massive foot and stomped the earth so hard that a shockwave rippled outward. From above, the ground looked as if it had been split open, all fissures radiating from the point where Wington's foot struck. Thor, the god of thunder, was caught off guard. The blast sent him sprawling, his divine organs rattling and his stomach lurching with nausea. A high-pitched buzzing grew louder. From the tip of Wington's tail, a dazzling blue light flared to life, racing up the row of spines along his back like a living current. "Stop him! Now!" someone shouted, panic sharpening their voice. "The monster those Hydra scientists built is basically a walking nuclear reactor," Tony blurted out, his optical sensors flashing red as they neared overload. At his warning, the Green Hulk lunged at Wington. With a guttural snarl, Wington opened his jaws and unleashed a crackling beam of cobalt energy. The blast struck the Hulk squarely, incinerating the ground beneath him and bathing the battlefield in searing light. Everyone staggered back, shielding their eyes from the glare. "Hulk!" someone cried. Through the roar of pain, the Hulk staggered free of the jet's aftermath. He threw himself at Wington and delivered a massive punch to the creature's face. The impact drove Wington to his knees, fractured the armored scales on his head, and sent blood spraying across the scorched earth. The Hulk bore heavy scorch marks and patches of burnt emerald flesh. But as a creature who had survived even the Saiyan's deadliest blasts, he rose again, roaring with renewed fury. Wington, clutching his shattered skull, stared up at his foe through a curtain of blood as the battle raged on. Ethan watched from the edge of the shattered plaza as Thor seized his moment. With a fierce swing, the god of thunder drove both Mjolnirs into Wington's skull, dropping the dragon-level creature to its knees. Before it could even rise again, Captain Marvel soared overhead, her body crackling with cosmic energy. With a single, earth-shaking blast, she struck Wington's chest, and the monster crumpled in an instant. In a one-on-one fight, Wington might have held out much longer, but faced with the combined might of the Hulk, Thor, and Captain Marvel, the beast didn't stand a chance. Like a hapless opponent overwhelmed by a superior strategy, Wington was undone within minutes of entering the battlefield, mere days after its terrifying birth. If the Saiyan invasion hadn't stalled, Ethan knew the Illuminati would have executed the creature on the spot. Unlike their DC counterparts, who cling to rigid no-kill doctrines, Marvel's heroes had never hesitated to eliminate threats outright. Tony Stark himself had cut down more villains than most governments. Still, death would have been a kinder fate than what the Illuminati had in store. When the Scions finally returned, monsters like Winkton would be pressed into service as cannon fodder, trial runs for new weapons, tests of raw power against the universe's deadliest invaders. Survive that, and any sin could be pardoned. After all, they were fighting for billions of lives. Ethan padded across the smoking ground as the rest of the Illuminati assembled, Stark calibrating his armor, Banner disappearing into his lab to analyze samples, Reed Richards frowning over strategic maps. Together, they would reclaim what remained of the world and reshape it in humanity's image. He drew a steadying breath. The war was far from over, but here, on this broken field, humanity had won a hard-fought victory, and Ethan would be there for every moment to come. The human governments continued to bicker over whether to deploy ground forces to Wakanda, but in the end, they never had to. The Illuminati had already neutralized the alien incursion, leaving Wakanda secure. In fact, just as Stark had suspected, Wakanda was perfectly suited to serve as the Illuminati's Earthside headquarters. Their orbiting fortress might remain the primary stronghold, but an on-planet base was every bit as vital. What sealed the deal was vibranium, endless supplies of it, and the advanced energy shield technology Wakanda had developed around it. Stark couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. Human science fiction had toyed with shield generators for decades, yet none had come close to Wakanda's seamless citywide defenses. Here, at long last, was a working model, and thanks to vibranium, it was decades ahead of anything Stark Industries had ever produced. Yet Wakanda had paid a terrible price. Under Hydra's ruthless onslaught, the 5 tribes had suffered grievous losses. Even now, they struggled to rebuild and fortify their borders. Tony Stark, whose temperament in this timeline bore little resemblance to the kindly benefactor the world remembered, had no sympathy for their plight. He saw only one priority: securing vibranium at any cost. With whispers of a Scion invasion and growing louder by the day, Stark was determined to do whatever was necessary to prepare. King T'Chaka and Prince T'Challa exchanged uncertain looks, unsure how to respond to his unyielding demands. "I'd be glad to help. Could you please paste the full chapter text here? Once I have the complete passage, I'll rewrite it into a polished, idiomatic English version with Ethan as the male protagonist.